I need you to close your eyes right now and picture something bizarre with me. You've got it all. A house so massive you'll never see half the rooms. Staff appearing at your side before you've even thought to ask. Dresses sewn from silk that travelled halfway around the earth to reach you. And yet nothing belongs to you. Not your schedule, not your flesh, not even the words you're permitted to say out loud. This is what it meant to be a rich Victorian woman, where comfort became a prison made of expensive fabric and doing nothing was essentially your full-time job. We're talking about the 1870s here. Queen Victoria's on the throne, still mourning her husband with an intensity that would embarrass grief itself. The British Empire's spread across the planet like someone's greedy fingers. And in those grand London houses, in the nicest parts of town, women just like you open their eyes each day to an existence so rigidly controlled it makes modern jail routines seem loose. The twisted part: everybody thinks you're the fortunate one. Here's what I'm telling you. You'd lose your mind in 2 weeks. Not because things are hard, but because they're the opposite. Because of the gradual choking pressure of having zero purpose while being observed constantly. If you've never been here before, hello. I create these lengthy, wandering history tales for folks who need something peaceful to drift off to. If that's your sort of thing, maybe subscribe and hang around for more. No obligation, though. I'm just glad you showed up tonight. Leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. I'm always wondering, is it nighttime where you are? Dawn? Something in the middle? Right then. Let yourself settle a bit deeper into whatever you're lying on. Breathe slower and come with me into a bedroom that's worth more than what most folks make in their entire lives. A bedroom that somehow still manages to feel like confinement. You never wake up by yourself. That's the first thing you've got to grasp about existing as a well-off Victorian lady. Being alone isn't something you get, despite all the other privileges stacked around you like fancy decoration. Before your eyes have completely focused in the weak morning brightness, before you've had one clear thought, there's a gentle tap on your bedroom door. It's your lady's maid. She's been conscious for no less than 2 hours, already getting ready for this exact moment, the moment you return to the land of the living. The space smells like lavender water mixed with coal dust, an odd pairing that somehow captures this entire period. Down below you in the basement kitchens, fires have been going since 4 this morning, pushing warmth up slowly through the skeleton of the house. But your bedroom's still chilly, the sort of chilly that makes you want to stay wrapped in your covers. Your maid pulls the curtains back just a bit to allow in a sliver of pale brightness. Not much. A lady's skin needs protection at any cost, even from the weak English sun. Here's an interesting detail historians enjoy bringing up. Plenty of rich Victorian ladies didn't actually leave their beds for the early part of their morning ritual. Breakfast in bed wasn't reserved for sick people or special days. It was normal procedure for women of a particular status. A tray would show up, brought by a housemaid holding weak tea and maybe a piece of thin toast. Nothing heavy, appetite, like energy, was thought rather crude in a woman. You take small bites of the toast. It tastes like duty. Your maid works quietly around the space, setting out the first of what's going to be multiple outfits today. That's right, multiple. The Victorians had a separate dress for every imaginable occasion, and switching between them wasn't a choice. The morning dress she's arranging right now is comparatively basic. A high-necked thing in a practical material, appropriate for the household hours before you might get visitors. But basic is relative here. There are still buttons, endless buttons, clasps, hooks, tapes, ties, a miniature construction job pretending to be clothes. You throw off the blankets and swing your legs over the edge of the bed. Your feet locate slippers that have been heating near the fire. This tiny pleasure, heated slippers, feels nearly revolutionary. The wooden floors would be freezing otherwise. And a lady can never look uncomfortable, even when alone. Particularly when alone. You never know who's looking. A servant, a sister-in-law, God himself, presumably, who the Victorians appeared to think had extremely firm views about standing up straight and how long your sleeves should be. The washing area's waiting for you in the corner, a porcelain bowl decorated with roses, a jug of water that got heated downstairs and hauled up by yet another servant. The water's barely warm anymore, but you splash your face regardless. The smell of rose soap drifts up faintly. This is your morning cleaning, and it's going to be quick. Complete baths are once-a-week events, complex operations involving hip baths dragged into your bedroom and countless kettles of hot water. For the moment, this works. You dry your face with a linen towel and your maid moves closer. And this is where the actual labour starts. Historians continue arguing about how much time the typical wealthy Victorian woman used getting dressed each morning. Some guesses put it at a minimum of 90 minutes. Others stretch it closer to 2.5 hours for fancy events. The reality probably shifted by house, by season, by how many social things were coming up. But one fact's definite: you couldn't manage this by yourself. The clothing of this time was deliberately created to need help. It was intentional, not accidental. Being independent wasn't the aim. Being dependent was sewn into every stitch, every clasp, every tie that fastened at your back where your own fingers could never touch. Your maid starts with your undergarments, and there are more pieces here than you'd think. First, a chemise, a plain cotton or linen shift that rests against your body, keeping the pricier outer clothes away from your body's basic humanness. The Victorians were profoundly bothered by the reality that people sweated, and the chemise worked as a wall between your embarrassing skin and your decent clothing. Then drawers, which are basically 2 individual leg covers, connected at the waist, split in the centre for practical reasons we don't have to examine closely. Over these comes a petticoat, then another petticoat. The Victorians trusted in backups. You stand in the middle of your bedroom, arms lifted slightly as material gets piled onto your body. The fire snaps quietly in the fireplace. Outside you can hear the far-off rattle of a carriage going by on the street down there, the beginning sounds of a city waking up. But in here, time works differently. In here you're being assembled item by item into the woman you're supposed to become. Your maid grabs the corset. The corset isn't what you imagined. You've heard the nightmare stories, naturally. Women collapsing at parties, ribs fractured and repositioned, internal organs squashed into impossible shapes. And while some of that's accurate, some of it's also Victorian-era nonsense, created to make women look even more delicate than society already claimed they were. The truth is more nuanced, more intriguing, and honestly, more aggravating than straight-up agony. Your maid holds up the item. It's constructed from tough cotton coutil, strengthened with whalebone, or actually baleen, the bendable keratin strips from the mouths of filter-feeding whales. The Victorians labelled it whalebone because it sounded fancier than whale mouth bristles, and being fancy was paramount. The corset's lightly boned, with tunnels stitched at even spaces to hold the strips secure. At the front, a metal busk, a flat, stiff closure, snaps together like protective gear. At the back, strings wait to be tightened. You lift your arms. The maid winds the corset around your middle, placing it deliberately so the busk rests flat against your breastbone. Snap, snap, snap. The front fasteners lock into position one after another, and already you sense the framework forming around you. This isn't compression, not just yet. This is structure. The corset doesn't only squeeze, it holds, raises, redistributes. It converts your actual body into a stylish outline, the sleek, curved line that Victorian trends required. Now the laces arrive. Your maid plants one hand against your lower spine and tugs. The feeling is odd, not exactly painful, but forceful. The fabric contracts around your ribs, your waist, the yielding parts of your torso. You breathe out slowly, and she tugs again. The opening at the back of the corset gets smaller. You can sense your posture shifting, your backbone straightening, your shoulders moving back almost automatically. The corset doesn't permit slouching, it doesn't permit much of anything, honestly. Here's a mainstream truth worth sharing. The heavily discussed tight lacing that supposedly triggered all those fainting episodes was really a minority habit, not standard practice. Most women lace their corsets to shrink their waists by just 2 to 4 inches, enough to make a fashionable outline, but not enough to create the severe health problems that later people love to overstate. The 18-inch waists you notice in fashion drawings were artistic dreams, not daily truth. Historians examining surviving corsets have discovered that the average waist size was somewhere around 22 to 26 inches. Tight, definitely, but not the torture tools of common belief. That being said, you're not precisely comfortable at this moment. The boning pushes against your lower ribs when you inhale too fully. You figure out fast to take shallow inhales, to let your chest lift gently instead of expanding dramatically. This is how Victorian women breathed, cautiously, sparingly, as if air itself had limits. Some researchers think this limited breathing added to the stereotype of the fragile, fainting woman. When you can't get a complete breath, even slight effort turns exhausting. The corset didn't just mould bodies, it moulded actions. Your maid finishes the laces and backs away to judge her work. You glimpse yourself in the mirror on the far side of the room. The change is striking. Your waist bends inward. Your chest rises. Your spine creates a straight, graceful line. You resemble a fashion illustration brought to life. You also feel like you're in a very courteous embrace that won't release. But the corset's just the start. Over it comes the corset cover, a basic cotton piece, meant to soften the lines of the boning and keep it from being visible through your dress. Then the crinoline or bustle, based on which decade. In the 1870s, the huge cage crinolines from before have been replaced by the bustle, a cushioned or built contraption that brings volume to the rear of your skirt, making that unique shape where women look like they're balancing a small platform on their backsides. The bustle fastens around your waist, and suddenly sitting becomes a strategy rather than an instinct. Here's an odd piece that historians enjoy mentioning. Bustles were occasionally filled with horsehair, cotton stuffing, or even wadded newspapers. Practical women worked with whatever gave the required poof. There are stories of bustles igniting when women stepped too near fireplaces, the padding catching fire and creating havoc at otherwise proper dinner gatherings. Fashion, apparently, has always included some danger. Additional petticoats come after the bustle. Victorian women usually wore anywhere from 3 to 6 petticoats, based on the weather and how formal things were. Each piece adds heaviness to your hips, material brushing against material as you shift. The noise is strangely calming, a gentle, steady murmur that goes with every movement. You're starting to see why Victorian women were described as rustling when they moved. They were dressed in enough material to cover a modest couch. Your maid assists you into your morning dress. This means more buttons than you can track, small pearl ones that travel up your spine in a never-ending line. She closes each one with skilled fingers, her actions swift and practiced. This is her work after all. She performs this every single day, several times daily, when you switch for afternoon things, and then once more for dinner. The closeness of it hits you suddenly. This woman understands your body more thoroughly than you do. She observes you half-clothed, exposed, human. And yet you likely don't know her family name. The dress falls into position, and you study yourself once more. High neck, long arms, fitted top, generous skirt flowing over the bustle. You look proper. You look rich. You look like precisely what you're meant to be. A woman of standing, prepared to confront a day of accomplishing almost nothing while seeming incredibly occupied. But your maid hasn't completed her work. She leads you to the dressing table, where a collection of brushes, combs, pins, and puzzling tools wait. Your hair needs styling, and this isn't a basic ponytail situation. Victorian hairstyles were intricate creations of braids, coils, curls, and waves, secured by countless hairpins and sometimes enhanced by false sections called rats or switches. Your maid picks up a brush and starts the slow, measured work of forcing your hair into obedience. The sensation is actually nice. the mild pull of bristles across your scalp, the quiet closeness of someone tending to you. You observe in the mirror as your hair gets twisted, pinned, and shaped into something resembling a modest building project. The scent of pomade flavoured with violet or rose saturates the air as she smooths stray pieces into position. Almost 2 hours have gone by since you initially opened your eyes. You've achieved nothing besides becoming presentable, and yet you're already exhausted. You go down the stairs like a vessel navigating dangerous waters. Every step needs cautious bargaining with your skirts, your bustle, and the basic physics of walking while dressed in what equals a compact tent. The railing is cool under your gloved fingers. Yes, you're wearing gloves inside now, lightweight cotton ones for morning use, because naked hands are seemingly wrong even in your own house. The Victorians had thoughts about everything, and visible skin was close to the top of their concerns. The breakfast room's waiting for you on the main floor. It's smaller than the formal dining space, more personal, with windows looking onto the rear garden where frost still grips the rose plants. The aroma of bacon and kidneys comes from the sideboard, thick and substantial, mixing with the sharper smell of potent tea. A fire glows in the fireplace, popping sometimes as the coals shift. The room's warm, nearly stuffy after the relative chill of your bedroom, and you feel a drop of sweat threatening to appear under your corset. You disregard it. Ladies don't sweat. They glow, at best. The sideboard's covered with enough food to feed a modest battalion. This is the Victorian breakfast in complete excessive magnificence. A sequence of silver-warming dishes keeping various meats hot. A holder of toast getting steadily colder. Containers of jam and marmalade, butter shaped into fancy forms, eggs fixed 3 separate ways, and something that appears questionable like fish kedgeree. Likely the Victorians took it from British India. Smoked haddock combined with rice, hard-cooked eggs, and curry powder. It sounds peculiar, but it's genuinely quite tasty. Not that you'll be consuming much of it. Here's a mainstream reality that could startle you. Rich Victorian women were meant to eat like small birds in company, no matter their real hunger. A robust appetite was thought masculine, even vulgar. Ladies nibbled at their meals, took tiny bites, and never, under any conditions, looked ravenous. This was especially accurate at dinner gatherings, but the practice reached breakfast too. You put on your plate a single piece of toast, a touch of butter, maybe a spoonful of eggs. Your plate appears nearly bare compared to what a man of the house might eat. You sit in your assigned spot at the table. If your husband's there, and in numerous houses he's already gone to his club or his work matters. Talk is limited. Breakfast isn't a social occasion. It's energy, taken quickly and effectively, a needed break before the actual business of the day starts. The quiet's interrupted only by the sound of silverware against china, the movement of newspaper sheets, the remote sounds of servants going through the house. The toast's cold. It's perpetually cold. By the time it moves from the kitchen in the basement, up the steps, and onto the sideboard, whatever heat it once had has completely vanished. You chew automatically, rinsing each bite with tea that's become slightly lukewarm. The flavour's familiar, unremarkable. Bread, butter, the mild bitterness of tea leaves soaked too long. This isn't a meal to be enjoyed. This is a meal to be endured. Within 20 minutes, breakfast's finished. You touch your lips with a linen napkin, push your chair back, and get ready for the first actual assignment of your day. Letters. Your morning room's a modest refuge on the first level, furnished in soft blues and creams, with a writing desk placed near the window to grab the best brightness. This is your territory, one of the limited areas in the house that primarily belongs to you. Here, surrounded by paper and sealing wax, you handle the invisible operations of Victorian social existence. And don't be fooled, it is operations as intricate and challenging as anything occurring in the men's offices downtown. The desk's already stacked with today's mail. Your butler's organised it naturally, dividing the cards and invites from any real letters, setting everything in sequence of seeming priority. You sit in your chair, a delicate thing covered in silk that gives roughly zero back support, and examine the situation. There are calling cards from yesterday's callers, each one needing acknowledgement, invitations to dinners, musical events, charity functions, a message from your dressmaker about a fitting, a letter from a far-off cousin wanting a favour, and dozens of cards that share information through a complex code of bent corners and mysterious abbreviations that would puzzle any current observer. Here's an odd fact that historians find perpetually captivating. Victorian calling cards were their own language. A card with the top right corner bent meant the caller had appeared personally. Top left corner bent showed congratulations. Bottom right meant farewell, like when departing town. Bottom left communicated sympathy. All four corners bent meant the card was intended for everyone in the family. There were also shorthand marks penciled in corners. PF for poor Felicita, to congratulate. PC for poor condolence, sympathies. PPC for poor prendre conge, to say goodbye. You basically needed a secret code guide to handle polite society. You grab the first card and look at it. Mrs. Hartley Worthington visited yesterday at 3 in the afternoon, top right corner bent. She appeared personally, but you were away. Or actually, you were not at home, which is Victorian language for I'm present. But I don't want company right now. Now you need to reciprocate the visit within 7 days or chance making a social mistake that could spread through your whole circle. The weight of this seems ridiculous, and yet it's completely genuine. Your pen moves across paper as you start writing replies. The noise is curiously soothing, the gentle scratch of the nib on linen paper, the occasional stop to dip in the inkwell. The ink has an iron gall smell, faintly acidic, blending with the lavender pouches hidden in your desk compartments. You write in a precise slanted script, the handwriting trained into you from youth. Every letter needs to be flawlessly shaped. Carelessness implies a careless brain. Some experts claim that this detailed letter system gave Victorian women a type of authority within their limited world. They managed social connections, decided who got invited where, handled the elaborate network of duties and exchanges that connected upper-class society together. Others think it was just busy work, a method of keeping women focused on minor things while men dealt with real matters. The reality, as always, likely sits somewhere in between. By midday, your hand hurts from writing. You've answered 14 cards, turned down 2 invites, said yes to 3, and written a delicately worded letter to your mother-in-law that expresses virtually nothing while covering 2 complete pages. This is a talent, the craft of writing extensively without sharing substance. Victorian women mastered it. The carriage is waiting for you at the front entrance, a sleek black brougham with your family symbol carefully painted on the door panel. The coachman sits stiff on his seat, breath clouding in the cold air. The horses stamp restlessly against the cobblestones. You collect your skirts, take the footman's gloved hand, and step into the velvet-covered interior. The door shuts behind you with a pleasing thunk, and immediately the street noise becomes muted, remote, as if you've stepped into a small, moving space that exists in a quieter reality. The seat's cold, despite the heated brick wrapped in flannel that's been set on the floor for your feet. You position your skirts around you, occupying far more room than seems logical for one person. The bustle makes sitting a puzzle. You lean slightly forward, your spine never quite meeting the seat, keeping the position that your corset requires. Through the little window, London passes in a display of grey stone and iron fences, people rushing along walkways, street sellers announcing their goods in voices that reach even the carriage interior. This is the morning visit, and despite what it's called, it seldom occurs in the morning. Here's a mainstream reality that baffles everyone who initially learns it. Morning visits in Victorian England really happened in the afternoon, usually between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. The morning referenced the period before dinner, which in stylish houses didn't happen until 8 or 9 at night. So, your morning extends generously across most of the daylight, a language oddity that perfectly demonstrates the Victorian skill for making basic things needlessly complex. The carriage bumps over an especially rough section of road, and you steady yourself against the leather loop hanging by the window. The smell inside combines leather polish, your own perfume, a mild floral scent dabbed carefully on your handkerchief, and the slight mouldiness of velvet that's soaked up years of London mist. Outside, a newsboy yells something about Parliament, a dog makes noise. The beat of the horse's feet makes a constant rhythm under everything else. Your first destination is the house of Mrs. Ashworth, a woman you hardly know but whose friendship you need to develop because her husband just got a knighthood and suddenly everyone's extremely keen on being her friend. The carriage stops before an attractive townhouse in Belgravia, white stucco shining even under the cloudy sky. You don't really anticipate seeing Mrs. Ashworth. That's not truly the objective. The footman opens your door and assists you down. You walk toward the front steps, your card case gripped in your gloved hand, a compact silver thing engraved with your initials, holding maybe 24 of your personal calling cards. These rectangles of cream-tinted Bristol board are your social money, more influential in certain ways than real cash. You pull one out, bend the top right corner to show you visited personally, and give it to the butler who's appeared at the entrance with the quiet skill of an especially well-practiced ghost. "Is Mrs. Ashworth available?" you ask, understanding completely that the response relies on countless elements that have nothing to do with Mrs. Ashworth's actual whereabouts. The butler's expression shows nothing. "I'll check, ma'am." He vanishes into the dark interior, leaving you standing in the entry hall, not fully inside, not fully outside, hanging in a social middle ground that could swing either direction. The corridor smells like beeswax and greenhouse flowers. Lilies likely, their thick sweetness nearly overwhelming. A grandfather clock ticks somewhere further in the house. You wait. This is what you accomplish. You wait. Here's an odd detail that shows the absurdity of the entire arrangement. A woman could be sitting in her drawing room, completely dressed for callers, totally free, and still tell her butler to say she wasn't available. This wasn't viewed as lying. It was a social pretense that everyone grasped and permitted. Not available meant I don't want to see you right now, and no insult was intended or received. The turned-away caller would just leave her card and attempt again later. It was dismissal, covered in such heavy layers of courtesy that it hardly hurt whatsoever. The butler comes back. Mrs. Ashworth's apparently unavailable. You feel nothing. This is anticipated, even typical, especially when visiting a new acquaintance. You fulfilled your obligation by leaving your card. Mrs. Ashworth will fulfill hers by reciprocating the visit within 2 weeks. The performance goes on, movement by deliberate movement, until finally you might really have a talk with this woman you're supposedly so anxious to know. Back into the carriage, forward to the next house. The routine repeats. Your second visit works better. Mrs. Pemberton's available, and you're shown into her drawing room for the required 15 minutes of courteous talk. The room's overfilled in the Victorian manner, every surface packed with decorations, photographs in silver holders, fake flowers under glass covers. The wallpaper's a rich crimson that makes the area feel smaller and hotter than it likely is. Mrs. Pemberton sits on a sofa covered in a material that conflicts wonderfully with the walls, and you settle yourself onto the assigned visitor's seat. Positioned, you observe, somewhat lower than your hostess's seat, a gentle reminder of who controls authority in this specific interaction. The talk is agreeable and completely hollow. You review the weather, which has been unexpectedly cold. You reference a shared acquaintance who's recently been confined, the polite expression for being in the late stages of pregnancy and thus socially absent. You praise a new decoration on the mantel, a porcelain shepherdess that Mrs. Pemberton brought from Dresden. You don't review politics, religion, finances, scandal, or anything remotely engaging. These subjects are banned in mixed settings, and even among women by themselves, they're handled with serious care. Historians still argue what women really discussed during these formal calls. The official accounts suggest continuous talks of household administration, fashion, and family updates. But some researchers claim that the drawing room was where actual information got traded. Gossip, cautions, tactical guidance exchanged between women who knew that information was its own type of power. The 15-minute restriction on visits meant these trades had to be quick, encrypted, filled with significance that a random witness might completely overlook. The mantel clock rings the quarter hour. Your time's over. You stand, trade the proper courtesies, and withdraw to your waiting carriage. 3 additional visits wait for you this afternoon, and the brightness is already starting to diminish toward the early winter darkness. You sink back against the cold leather seat and observe the city moving by through the little window. Your feet are frozen despite the heated brick. Your spine aches from sitting perfectly upright for hours, and somewhere in the rear of your thoughts you're already figuring tomorrow's responsibilities. Who needs to be visited? Who needs to be prevented? Who has offended whom? And what the suitable reaction should be? The social machine never quits operating, and you, balanced in your velvet-covered carriage, are simply another piece. The carriage turns down a different path now, pulling away from the spotless white townhouses of Belgravia towards streets that grow steadily narrower, steadily darker. The cobblestones get more jagged underfoot. The buildings shed their polished stucco fronts and show naked brick, blackened with soot and falling apart in spots. The air shifts too. That subtle scent of greenhouse flowers and candle wax fades into something harsher, more truthful. Coal fumes, spoiled produce, the sharp bite of too many people crammed together without proper sanitation. You're headed out to do charity work. This isn't something you can decline. A well-off Victorian lady was required to participate in charitable activities, to distribute her generosity among the worthy poor, like spreading jam on particularly unfortunate toast. It was seen as part of your responsibility as a Christian, as a woman, as someone from the upper reaches of society who'd been favoured by fate and therefore bound to extend those favours to the less blessed. The reality that this sharing seldom demanded any genuine sacrifice from you was irrelevant. The act itself counted. The demonstration of caring was nearly as valuable as actual compassion. You're bound for a mission hall in one of the rougher neighbourhoods, a squat brick structure that functions as a centre for distributing soup, bedding and moral guidance. You helped found this specific charity 3 years back, which means your name shows up on the letterhead and you're required to visit periodically to prove your ongoing commitment. The actual work gets handled by paid supervisors and volunteer visitors, middle-class women who face fewer social demands and have more hours for genuine labour. Your function is mostly ornamental. You're the gracious benefactor, spreading kindness simply through your presence. The carriage halts and your footman pulls the door open with clear reluctance. This isn't the kind of area he likes stopping in. You climb down onto cobblestones slippery with something you decide not to study too carefully and lift your skirts clear of the muck. The mission hall door swings wide and a middle-aged woman in a stark grey dress steps out to meet you. Mrs. Finch, the supervisor who genuinely runs this operation with frightening precision. Lady Ashford, how generous of you to visit. Her voice is entirely polite and also somehow implies that your arrival is both anticipated and mildly disruptive. You've interrupted genuine work with your requirement to be witnessed performing good deeds. Within, the hall is heated and packed. The odour reaches you right away. Boiled cabbage, dirty wool, soaked fabric, and underneath it all, the bitter note of want itself. That specific smell of people who haven't been truly clean in weeks. You resist the urge to scrunch your nose. Refined women don't register offensive smells. Refined women hover above such physical realities, maintained by scented sachets and pure determination. Here's something widely known about Victorian charity. It was intensely, fundamentally focused on separating the worthy poor from the unworthy poor. The worthy poor were people who'd sunk into poverty through circumstances beyond their control. widows, children without parents, the ill, the aged. These individuals deserved help. The unworthy poor, conversely, were people whose poverty got blamed on character flaws, sloth drinking, immoral conduct. These individuals deserved sermons at most, condemnation at worst. The whole charitable system of Victorian England was built to categorise people into these groups and handle them differently. You walk through the hall, Mrs. Finch beside you, offering steady commentary on the worthy causes being served. Women in threadbare shawls perch on wooden benches, awaiting their chance to collect whatever's being handed out today. Broth, likely, and maybe some used clothing that women like you have given away. Kids clutch their mother's skirts, staring at you with enormous eyes. You offer them a smile. Smiling requires nothing. A tiny girl, maybe 5 years old, extends a grimy hand toward the silk of your gown. You go rigid. Her mother jerks her away with a mortified apology, reprimanding the child for presuming to touch a lady. The girl's expression collapses. You wish you could say something warm, something that might ease this moment, but the language won't come. What could you possibly say? That you're unbothered. But you are bothered somewhat. The hand was filthy, the dress is imported silk, and there's something unsettling about being touched by poverty, as if it could somehow spread. Here's an odd detail that shows the weird contradictions of Victorian thinking. Many charitable groups demanded the poor attend worship services or moral education sessions before getting any physical assistance. You couldn't simply be starving. You had to be starving and prepared to endure a speech about sobriety or frugality or the spiritual perils of laziness. Some missions forced recipients to perform hymns in return for broth. The body couldn't be nourished without first addressing the soul, even when the soul involved would have strongly preferred a meal and a heavy jacket, without the sermon attached. You end up posted at a table where bundles of garments are being handed out. Mrs. Finch has given you a pair of gloves, basic cotton, not your fine kid leather, and you're evidently meant to personally pass items to the women who come forward. This seems dangerously similar to actual labour. You smile, distribute bundles, whisper uplifting things about warmth and divine provision. The women who accept your charity bow slightly, express gratitude profusely, drop their gaze. The exchange feels strangely awkward for everyone involved. One woman stays a beat longer than the rest. She's younger than you anticipated, with features that could have been lovely before hunger and weariness carved them into harder angles. She's cradling an infant wrapped in a shawl so threadbare you can practically see through it. "God keep you, ma'am," she murmurs. "God keep you for your goodness." You wish you could say something authentic, something that recognises her as an individual instead of a charity case, a fellow person instead of an object of pity. But those words aren't part of your training. Your whole upbringing has equipped you for parlour chit-chat, for the refined skill of speaking prettily while saying nothing. It hasn't equipped you for this, for meeting the gaze of someone whose existence is truly harsh and discovering something genuine to express. You're entirely welcome. You say, "I certainly hope. I hope circumstances get better for you." She nods, grips her bundle and withdraws. You feel like an imposter. Some researchers contend that Victorian women's charitable activities, for all their condescension and moral superiority, represented a real broadening of women's public participation. It removed them from domestic confinement, provided them organisational practice, and enabled them to cultivate abilities that would eventually power movements for voting rights and social change. Others propose it was simply a release mechanism, directing women's efforts into pursuits that didn't challenge the established system. The impoverished remained impoverished, the wealthy remained wealthy, and everyone felt marginally better about the situation. By the time you climb back into your carriage, your cotton gloves are stained with something you can't identify, and your chest feels weightier than when you left. The footman assists you up with clear relief. The door shuts. The plush interior surrounds you again, and as the carriage rolls away from the mission hall, you catch yourself thinking about that young mother's name. You never considered asking. The carriage brings you home precisely as the clock in the entrance hall chimes 1. The sound echoes through the house, low, full, vaguely disapproving, as if time itself is monitoring your actions and judging them barely satisfactory. You pass your stained cotton gloves to the waiting maid, who carries them off to some hidden place where disagreeable things get managed by people who can't afford not to manage them. Your outer garments are stripped away, the substantial cloak, the bonnet with its complex ribbons, the quality kid gloves you layered over the cotton ones because layers, always layers. You step out of this shell of fabric feeling both lighter and somehow more vulnerable. Lunch is waiting. You'd assume that lunch would be straightforward. A sandwich, maybe some broth, something fast and sensible to fill the space between breakfast and dinner. But this is Victorian England, and straightforward doesn't exist. Even the most ordinary meal has to be elevated into an event complete with silverware, glassware, cut flowers, and a persistent undercurrent of worry about whether you're executing femininity properly while eating food. The dining room has been arranged for what the household views as a casual meal, meaning only 2 footmen stand ready instead of 4, and the tablecloth is simply Irish linen instead of the Belgian damask saved for formal dinners. The table accommodates 14, but today it's solely you. Your husband takes lunch at his club, as gentlemen typically do, and any children mature enough for solid food eat their meals upstairs in the nursery with their governess. This enormous, gleaming stretch of mahogany exists for you alone, a solitary place setting arranged at its head like a remote island in a wooden ocean. You take your seat. A footman appears to adjust your chair. Another footman arrives with the opening course, a transparent broth, golden-toned and shimmering, presented in a delicate bowl with handles formed like swans. The aroma is refined, beefy, with notes of sherry and something herbal you can't quite place. You select the correct spoon. Soup spoons are curved, keep in mind, and you scoop outward from yourself, never inward, and start the precise work of consuming food without seeming to consume it. Here's something commonly understood that clarifies the peculiar Victorian attitude toward food. Women of your standing were trapped in an absurd contradiction. They were accountable for overseeing elaborate homes that centred largely around preparing and serving meals. Yet they personally were meant to demonstrate almost no interest in actually consuming those meals. A robust appetite implied a deficiency of polish, even a kind of bestial nature that respectable ladies were presumed to have overcome. So you mastered the art of playing with your food, of taking minimal bites, of arranging things on your plate in ways that suggested eating without demanding much of it. The broth is replaced by a fish course, a modest serving of sole in butter sauce, the meat separating easily beneath your fork. The flavour is intense, nearly excessive after the charity hall's cabbage-scented atmosphere, and you discover your hunger more acute than typical. You consume maybe half what's presented before placing down your fork in the manner that signals you've finished. The footman clears your plate without reaction. His expression reveals nothing, though. Somewhere in the servants' quarters the cook will learn that my lady wasn't pleased with the sole, and there'll be subdued dismay about what this could indicate. A meat course comes after the fish, chilled chicken sliced delicately, served with a salad of watercress and cucumber. Then a dessert, a modest custard in a crystal vessel, quivering faintly as it's set before you. You taste a spoonful, perhaps 2. The vanilla fills your mouth, silky and reassuring. At last, fruit and cheese materialise, though you sample neither. 4 courses for a simple lunch. The Victorians held a very specific understanding of simple. Here's an unusual fact that illustrates the complex performance of Victorian dining. In numerous homes, the footmen were chosen partially for their looks. Tall, attractive footmen were marks of prestige, exhibited during meals like especially appealing furnishings. Some households even demanded their footmen powder their hair in the outdated fashion, a custom that had vanished in polite society but continued below stairs as evidence of a genuinely distinguished establishment. The footman serving your water at this moment could have been employed as much for his legs as his capability. You're not meant to observe this. You observe it regardless. The quiet of the dining room gets broken only by the gentle chime of your utensils, the occasional groan of a footman adjusting his stance, the far-off noises of the household pursuing its duties. Beyond these barriers, somewhere lower, the kitchen workers are already starting preparations for dinner, a much more intricate meal that will demand hours of effort and countless plates. The scullery maid is likely submerged to her elbows in oily water at this moment, scraping the pots from your breakfast and this lunch, her hands crimson and chapped from the caustic soap. You don't contemplate her. You're not meant to contemplate her. The whole arrangement is constructed so you never need to consider the people who enable your ease. You touch your lips with a napkin and stand from the table. 35 minutes have elapsed. You've taken in maybe 800 calories at most, distributed across sufficient courses to resemble a banquet. Your corset feels more constricting than it did this morning, not because you've eaten excessively, but because you've been confined in it for hours and the boning has started to press against your ribs in ways that guarantee bruises by nightfall. You dismiss the discomfort. Ladies consistently dismiss the discomfort. Some researchers have proposed that the Victorian woman's limited diet represented a type of physical regulation that reflected her social limitations. Just as she wasn't allowed to navigate freely through society, she wasn't allowed to feed herself freely either. Others contend that the modest appetites were authentic, the consequence of restrictive corseting that compressed the stomach and rendered substantial meals physically painful. Still others observe that many women ate quite heartily in seclusion, preserving the act of daintiness only under observation. The reality, as with many matters, likely differed from woman to woman, home to home. What's undeniable is that you're somewhat hungry nearly constantly, not famished. The food appears plentiful enough, but never entirely satisfied either. There's perpetually a mild emptiness under your ribs, a trace of longing that you've trained yourself to read as refinement instead of denial. This is what existing as a lady amounts to, you've realised. It amounts to being nearly enough, nearly full, nearly at ease, nearly liberated. The nearly is the essence. Total satisfaction could result in complacency. And complacent women are threatening women. Preferable to maintain them just marginally hungry, marginally uncomfortable, marginally conscious that flawlessness stays forever beyond grasp. The afternoon extends ahead of you. Additional duties are waiting. Smooth your skirts, verify your appearance in the mirror over the sideboard, and brace yourself to welcome visitors. Today is Thursday, and in your home, Thursday indicates you are receiving. This expression sounds harmless enough. Naturally, you're receiving. What other place would you occupy? But in the encoded vocabulary of Victorian culture, it holds particular meaning. Being receiving means you've appointed this afternoon as your formal welcoming period, the hours when you'll greet visitors in your drawing room and participate in the intricate ceremony of social exhibition. Every woman of your position has her receiving day noted on her calling cards and committed to memory by everyone in her sphere. Lady Hartington welcomes on Tuesdays, Mrs. Pemberton on Wednesdays, you on Thursdays. The timetable is absolute, unchangeable, more inflexible than most devotional practices. You've altered your dress, naturally. The practical morning outfit has been swapped for something more ornate, an afternoon gown in rich garnet silk decorated with black velvet trim and a restrained quantity of jet beading that sparkles in the light when you shift. The bustle has been readjusted, the hair reset, clean gloves obtained. You've been reassembled for the second instance today, converted from the woman who toured charity halls this morning into the woman who welcomes callers this afternoon. They aren't entirely the same individual, though. They inhabit a body and a title. The drawing room has been organised with matching attention. Cut flowers positioned in crystal containers. Greenhouse roses in January. a modest fortune in blooms. The fire stoked to a pleasant warmth, the finest china arranged for tea, though tea won't appear until 4 o'clock, and it's just past 2:30. Seats have been situated at exact angles, near enough for dialogue, but distant enough that no one's skirts will touch. The room carries the scent of roses, coal fumes, and wood polish, a blend so recognisable it's evolved into the fragrance of your social existence. You lower yourself into your appointed seat, a tall-backed chair beside the fireplace that provides the optimal light and the most authoritative perspective of the room. This is your seat of power for the afternoon. From here, you'll preside, accept petitioners, distribute the value of your focus in precisely calibrated amounts. The clock on the shelf ticks methodically, measuring the minutes until your initial visitor shows up. You remain still. This is your occupation. You remain still, exquisitely positioned, like a portrait that happens to draw breath. Here's something generally recognised about Victorian receiving days. They functioned as the central system for sustaining and enlarging social connections among the privileged classes. In a time before telephones, before electronic mail, before any mode of immediate communication, these weekly welcoming hours were how women remained in touch. You discovered who was unwell, who was away, who had delivered a child, who had passed away. You absorbed speculation and verified information. You arranged partnerships and resolved disagreements. The drawing room was a headquarters masked as a sitting area, and the woman who occupied its centre controlled more power than most men would ever admit. The initial knock arrives at exactly 3 o'clock. Your butler proclaims Mrs. Worthington and her daughter, a young woman of maybe 17, who's evidently being presented to society beneath her mother's careful supervision. They step in amid a swish of silk and anxious vitality, the daughter lingering somewhat back, as if wishing to vanish into her mother's considerable profile. You stand, offer your hand, voice the expected salutations. Everyone takes their seats. The ceremony has started. Discussion travels along its established paths. The climate is addressed. Exceptionally frigid, everyone concurs, though what would typical cold even resemble in January? The daughter's forthcoming presentation is referenced, and you extend ambiguous support that requires nothing and obligates you to nothing. Mrs. Worthington asks about your husband's condition, your household's welfare, and you supply responses that are agreeable and wholly uninformative. The clock advances. 15 minutes extend like pulled sugar, each moment somehow both endless and brief. Here's an odd detail about the workings of receiving visits. In exceptionally grand homes, the butler would genuinely monitor the visits, materialising at exactly the 15-minute point to declare a fresh arrival, genuine or invented, thus indicating that the present guests should prepare their exit. This spared everyone the embarrassment of lingering too long while sustaining the pretense that the withdrawal was triggered by outside factors instead of tedium or social duty. Certain visitors, especially those regarded as dull or forward, discovered that fresh arrivals manifested with questionable regularity during their stays. Mrs. Worthington and her daughter take their leave, and before you can recover your composure, the subsequent visitors show up. Mrs. Ashworth, the identical woman you visited earlier today and found unavailable, has evidently recovered from her ailment and is now reciprocating your visit. You receive her with affection that's wholly theatrical, guide her to the premier guest chair and initiate the whole routine again. Yes, the climate is frigid. Yes, the season looks to be animated. Yes, you're quite anticipating Lady Someone or Other's dance next month. The expressions could be delivered while sleeping. Maybe they are. The afternoon transforms into a succession of countenances, of silk and plumes, and the subtle rustle of calling cards being traded. Your drawing room swells and drains like an ocean controlled by social instead of celestial powers. The tea service is introduced at 4 and you oversee the custom, adding milk initially or subsequently, 1 portion or 2, the hallowed arrangement of cup and plate, and silver implement. The tea is potent and heated, a minor comfort in an afternoon of executing pleasantness. You drink a taste between visitors, sense the heat expanding through your torso, and question if this is what satisfaction resembles, or simply its plausible imitation. Some academics propose that the strict formality of Victorian visiting fulfilled a defensive role, especially for women. The regulations established structure, consistency, security. You constantly understood what to anticipate, what was anticipated of you, how to conduct yourself in any particular circumstance. There was reassurance in that predictability, even when it arrived at the expense of impulsiveness. Other researchers propose that the formality was itself a mechanism of regulation, a method of funneling women's social vitality into pursuits that strengthened instead of questioned the prevailing system. The perpetual visiting, the complex manners. These occupied women provided them a feeling of meaning and significance, while guaranteeing they never possessed time or strength to wonder whether the arrangement itself was sensible. By 5 o'clock, the final visitor has withdrawn, and the drawing room seems drained, weary, as if the barriers themselves require a pause to recuperate. The flowers are sagging marginally in their containers, exhausted by the intensity of the fire and the gathered exhalations of a dozen women. The tea service rests in chaos, cups partially drained, pastry fragments dispersed across the quality tablecloth. Servants emerge to remove it all, to re-establish harmony before dinner, to ready the room for tomorrow's vacancy. You stay in your chair a beat longer than required, gazing at the fire. Your expression hurts from grinning. Your throat has grown faintly rough from hours of measured discussion. And yet you've achieved nothing concrete. No labour completed, no difficulties resolved, no creativity produced or understanding acquired. You've merely executed for hours the part of lady, of hostess, of social being. And tomorrow you'll repeat it, and the following day, and the day beyond that, until the season concludes, or you do. The fire snaps quietly, collapsing into its coals. Outside, the premature winter blackness has already descended, leaning against the panes, like an inquisitive witness. You at last stand, adjust your skirts, and ready yourself for the subsequent transformation. Dinner nears. Another wardrobe modification awaits. The execution never genuinely concludes. It merely shifts location. But before dinner, there's shopping to accomplish. Not the variety of shopping you'd envision. No navigating through congested pathways, no seeking out deals, no transporting your own purchases like some manner of beast of burden. Victorian shopping for women of your station is an altogether different category of pursuit. It is execution, ceremony, spectacle. It is reclining in plush seats while goods are presented to you, tasting tea while clerks hover around like worried birds, and never under any conditions managing currency personally. That's what accounts exist for. The vulgar transaction of money is something that occurs elsewhere, invisibly, between your husband's clerk and the establishment's record books. You merely indicate things, and they transform into yours. As if through enchantment, your carriage leaves you on Regent Street, that extended, arcing boulevard of trade that functions as the pulsing centre of stylish London shopping. The gas lamps are already burning against the advancing dusk, their amber radiance bouncing off rain-dampened pavements and plate-glass displays. The street vibrates with motion, carriages competing for space, walkers threading between them, shop attendants in aprons rushing out to help patrons or clear the stairs of the constant London filth. The atmosphere carries horse scent, coal fumes, roasting chestnuts from a cellar on the intersection, and beneath everything the odd metallic note of a city in the grip of industry. You're travelling to Swan and Edgar, the massive fabric merchant at Piccadilly Circus, though fabric merchant scarcely encompasses the range of what this location provides. It's a fortress of material, a shrine of acquisition, 4 levels of silk and wool and cotton and items you didn't realise you required until you witnessed them arranged beneath the attractive radiance of gas fixtures. The structure itself is commanding. Traditional pillars, massive displays, the sort of architectural magnificence typically allocated for financial institutions or administrative structures. Trade in Victorian England has evolved into its own faith, and these establishments are its sanctuaries. The porter identifies you, or affects to, which equals the identical result, and escorts you inside with a gesture that accomplishes being both servile and refined. The interior reveals itself before you like a vision of plenty. Displays extend in all directions, covered with materials in every conceivable shade and consistency. Shop workers in dark dresses and pale collars stand prepared, poised to leap into motion at the faintest sign of curiosity. The aroma transforms as you step in now, its stiffening and starch. The distinct scent of fresh material combined with the beeswax shine on the timber displays, and something flowery, likely the fragrance of the 6 other ladies currently examining the ground level. Here's something broadly understood about Victorian shopping that could astonish you. The idea of the department store as we comprehend it was fundamentally created during this era. Before the 1850s, shopping involved visiting separate specialised establishments. One for hand coverings, one for decorative trim, one for material, one for completed articles. The massive department stores altered everything, collecting all these products beneath one ceiling and converting shopping from a functional errand into a recreational pursuit. For women particularly, these stores presented something unprecedented. A proper public location where they could invest hours without a male escort, examining, mingling, even consuming lunch. The department store was, in its manner, a modest uprising. You're directed to the silk section, where a seat has been conjured from somewhere and arranged at a convenient distance from the display. You settle in. Tea materialises, presented on a modest tray by a clerk whose entire function appears to be guaranteeing your ease while you expend money. The exchange has started, but it doesn't resemble an exchange. It resembles a visit, a social encounter where the goods are simply a pretext for the engagement. The shop clerk starts displaying silks for your review. Roll after roll gets unfurled across the display. Cascades of material in sapphire and emerald and a rich rose that would appear stunning as an evening outfit. You extend to feel them. This is allowed, even anticipated, and the experience is remarkable. Chilled and sleek under your touch, slippery in a manner that implies luxury, excellence, cost. The material murmurs as the clerk manipulates it, a gentle hushing noise that's oddly calming. You could drift off to that noise, you consider, the whisper of silk being offered for consideration. Here's an unusual detail that demonstrates the complex theatre of Victorian shopping. In the finest establishments, patrons were never anticipated to inquire the cost of anything. Doing so would be crude, an implication that expense could shape your choice. Rather, costs were either noted on modest, subtle markers that you could review without remark or simply forwarded along with the products when they were transported to your residence and charged to your ledger. Some ladies truly had zero comprehension what items cost. Their husbands managed such matters. The establishment managed such matters. Currency was a current that coursed around them, unseen and unspoken. You choose 3 lengths of silk, the sapphire, the rose, and a cream that will serve beautifully for a summer afternoon outfit. Without ever addressing what they cost or how you'll settle, the clerk records your selections in a leather-covered journal, designates them for transport and expresses gratitude with an enthusiasm that appears nearly sincere. Maybe it is. You've just invested more on material than most of the shop employees make in a month. Appreciation appears fitting, but you're not through. Shopping, like the remainder of your day, adheres to its own complex arrangement. From Swan and Edgar, you advance to a hat maker on Bond Street, a compact establishment, refined, where hats get fashioned as separate artistic pieces, and the reservation list for a fresh bonnet can reach 6 weeks. The inside is shadowy and crowded, containers piled to the rafters, the aroma of plumes and woven straw, and the specific mustiness of preserved material. Madame Celestine herself steps from the rear area to welcome you, pins jutting from her bodice like defensive gear. A measuring ribbon suspended around her throat like a ritual emblem of authority. You're presented illustrations of fresh styles, plumes and blossoms, and complex creations that appear to challenge both physics and rational thinking. Victorian hats aren't understated matters. They are structural declarations balanced atop meticulously styled hair and fastened with pins lengthy enough to function as arms in a crisis. The present style prefers elevation and forward angle, producing a shape that renders you perpetually startled looking. You study the illustrations, produce affirming sounds, demand a minor modification to the decoration on one style. Madame Celestine acknowledges, as if you've expressed something meaningful. Some researchers interpret Victorian shopping habits as an initial manifestation of consumer economics, conditioning women to discover satisfaction through obtaining instead of producing. The endless rotation of style, fresh shapes each season, fresh shades, fresh decorations guaranteed that no wardrobe was ever genuinely finished. That contentment stayed constantly beyond reach. Others contend that shopping provided women authentic enjoyment and independence, one of the limited domains where their selections had weight and their preferences received serious attention. The establishments pursued female patrons, accommodated their inclinations, handled them as significant in a society where women possessed so minimal authority that acknowledgement, however financially driven, must have signified something. Your concluding destination is a glove craftsman where you're fitted for 3 fresh pairs, white kid for evening, tan for afternoon visits, black for morning, should the occasion present itself. The glove-maker's touch is gentle and exact as he gauges the width of your palm, the extension of your fingers, the distance from wrist to joint. The closeness of it is jarring. This unfamiliar person understands the precise measurements of your hands, knowledge more detailed than most individuals in your existence hold. You observe his fingers shift against yours and feel abruptly, oddly visible. The carriage transports you home through streets now entirely darkened, the gas lamps forming circles of amber against the advancing darkness. Packages will show tomorrow. The silks, the hat when it's completed, the gloves in their tissue-wrapped containers. You've obtained items today, though you haven't genuinely transported anything home. That's the mechanism. The products manifest later, like recollections of an agreeable vision, and someone else manages the practicalities of settlement and transport. You simply exist at the nucleus of this commercial sphere, a celestial body around which trade revolves, awaiting your gesture of acceptance. The clock chimes 4, and something alters in the character of the house. It's delicate, a mild acceleration in the servants' actions, a specific focus on precision that wasn't evident an hour earlier. The fire in the drawing room gets stoked to exactly the proper intensity. The drapes are modified to obstruct the final grey remnants of afternoon illumination while permitting the comfortable radiance of lamps to rule. And somewhere in the core of the kitchen, a kettle is starting its gradual progression toward heating. The moment of tea has come. You'd assume tea is merely a drink, a beverage, something you take in because you're parched or because caffeine assists you in enduring the afternoon decline. But in Victorian England, tea is none of those things. Tea is a custom, a devotion, a social framework, as elaborate and regulation governed as any ritual executed in Westminster Abbey. The consumption of afternoon tea isn't concerned with thirst. It's concerned with civilization itself, enacted daily in drawing rooms throughout the empire, an acknowledgement that whatever disorder exists outside these barriers, here at minimum order, dominates. The tea implements are already positioned. You observed them previously during your receiving hours, but now they acquire fresh importance. The silver tea set shines on its serving platter, buffed that very morning to a reflective finish by a housemaid whose name has never crossed your lips. The porcelain is your finest Wedgwood, soft blue, with white neoclassical figures caught in perpetual grace around the edges. Teacups so fragile you can see your fingers silhouette through them when you lift them toward the window. Plates that chime like small bells when you strike them with a fingertip, though naturally you would never commit anything so crude. Here's an established fact that clarifies how this ceremony became central to British culture. Afternoon tea was basically created in the 1842 by Anna Maria Russell, the Duchess of Bedford. She mentioned experiencing a sinking sensation during the extended interval between lunch and dinner, which, as fashionable dinner hours moved progressively later into the night, had expanded to 7 hours or beyond. Her answer was to ask for a modest meal of tea, bread and butter to be delivered to her private chambers in the afternoon. The custom caught on among her aristocratic circle, and within a generation it had evolved into a national tradition. One woman's appetite became an empire's fixation. The tea itself comes in a silver vessel covered in a padded warmer to preserve its heat. Your lady's maid, or occasionally you yourself when the gathering is personal enough, carries out the ceremonial act of serving. This is not as straightforward as it appears. There are choices to be made, loyalties to announce, milk first or tea first. The matter has split British culture for decades, with fervent supporters on each side. The milk-first camp contends that pouring cold milk into an empty cup safeguards the delicate porcelain from shattering when hot tea is added. The tea-first camp responds that you can more accurately assess the brew's potency and modify the milk appropriately. Relationships have been tested over this matter. Partnerships have survived greater challenges. You serve the tea first. You've always been a tea-first family, and custom must be preserved. The aroma rises with the vapour, deep, faintly astringent, with hints of bergamot. If you've selected Earl Grey, or the more direct multiple notes of Assam, the heat of the cup in your palms is reassuring, a modest comfort in an afternoon of orchestrated comforts. You lift it to your mouth and taste, sensing the warmth spread through your body for just an instant. Nothing else matters but this: the flavour, the heat, the peaceful contentment of a ceremony executed properly. But tea is not simply tea. Tea demands accompaniments, and these also observe rigid guidelines. There are sandwiches sliced into refined triangles or strips with the crusts mercilessly trimmed away. Cucumber is conventional, as is egg mixture, smoked salmon or preserved meat. There are scones presented with clotted cream and strawberry preserve, and here another significant controversy surfaces. Cream first or jam first? The Devonshire approach puts cream on the scone before jam. The Cornish approach inverts the sequence. Conflicts have not been waged over this matter, but emphatically worded correspondence has definitely been composed. Here's an unusual detail that demonstrates the meticulous nature of Victorian tea protocol. Manuals of the era devoted pages, sometimes whole chapters, to the correct management of teacups. The cup should be raised from the saucer when consuming. The saucer should stay on the table. If you're sitting at a table but grasped beneath the cup, if you're standing or sitting on a settee, the smallest finger should never be raised. That's a misconception, a misinterpretation of aristocratic mannerism that somehow became fixed in common understanding. The spoon, after mixing, must be positioned on the saucer behind the cup, never left standing in the tea like a flagpole marking territory. The mixing itself should be soundless, a delicate forward and backward movement rather than the circular clattering of a savage. You manage these demands without conscious thought, your hands executing the movements with the confidence of extensive training. Lift, taste, return. The tea is flawless, robust but not harsh, hot but not blistering. The sandwich you've chosen is cucumber, the slender slices nearly see-through against the white bread. The entire thing so delicate and insignificant it scarcely counts as nourishment. You consume it in 3 tiny bites, each one a demonstration of refinement. Ladies don't chomp, ladies taste. Ladies make the eating of a sandwich appear like an act of ultimate elegance rather than the gratification of basic appetite. The parlour is silent now, the succession of afternoon callers having left. It's just you and the tea service, the fire popping gently, the lamp throwing warm pools of illumination across the rug. This is what constitutes privacy in your existence. Not genuine isolation, because staff linger just outside the door, prepared to materialise at the ring of a bell, but something close to it, a break in the performance, an instant when no one is observing, or at least no one whose opinion you dread. Some researchers have proposed that the ceremony of afternoon tea established a feminine domain within the Victorian home, a time and location where women wielded absolute sovereignty. The parlour during tea was the lady's territory. She determined who was welcomed, what was offered, how long encounters lasted. The tea table was her seat of power, the silver vessel her symbol of authority. Other researchers propose this sovereignty was purely ornamental, a reflection of genuine authority that kept women preoccupied with insignificant matters while men made choices that truly mattered. The reality, as usual, likely includes aspects of both. You reach for a scone. The consistency is ideal, firm on the exterior, tender and somewhat crumbly inside, still heated from the oven. You separate it with your fingers because employing a knife would be improper, and spread first the cream, then the preserve. You are a Devonshire woman in your scone inclinations, though you've never actually travelled to Devonshire. The first mouthful is small, cautious, delectable. The sweetness of the preserve blends with the richness of the cream, and beneath it all, the mild, savoury character of the scone itself. For this single instant, consuming feels like enjoyment rather than duty. The fire shifts, sending a small spray of embers up the flue. Outside, the final light has disappeared completely, and London has yielded to the premature darkness of winter. In homes across the metropolis, comparable scenes are unfolding. Women serving tea, choosing sandwiches, managing the complex choreography of cream and preserve. There's something almost reassuring in the notion, this extensive network of tea tables and silver vessels, and women executing the same ceremonies at the same moment, linked by tradition if nothing else. You place down your cup and recline slightly in your seat as much as the corset permits. The tea has accomplished its purpose. The sinking sensation, if you ever experienced one, has been forestalled for another day. Shortly you'll need to ascend upstairs and commence the extended process of preparing for dinner. But for now, for just these few lingering minutes, you can simply rest, simply inhale, simply exist in the interval between duties, observing the fire and sensing the last warmth of the teacup diminishing against your hands. The timepiece ticks toward 5. The ceremony is finished, and somewhere in the cooking area, staff are already commencing the arrangements for the next course, the next performance, the continuous cycle of eating and presentation that organises your days. Like a framework, organises a climbing plant. You develop in the configurations you're provided. Everyone does the tea service has been removed, and you find yourself solitary in the parlour with a peculiar, recognisable sensation descending over you. It begins as a weightiness behind your eyes, a minor tremor in your chest, a fatigue that seems to originate from somewhere more profound than simple tiredness. You've experienced this before. You experience it frequently, actually, this advancing exhaustion, this impression of being consumed by nothing specific. The Victorians have a term for it naturally. They have terms for everything. They label it nervousness, or neurasthenia, or sometimes simply the vapours. And if it continues, if it intensifies, if it starts to obstruct your responsibilities as a wife and hostess and decoration, they might label it something else altogether. They might label it hysteria. You sink deeper into your seat, one hand positioned lightly against your temple in the universal expression of feminine anguish. The room abruptly feels too heated, the corset too constricting, the burden of the day too substantial. Your maid materialises as if conjured by telepathy. Perhaps she was observing through the gap in the door, vigilant to any indication that you might require attention. She retrieves a small glass container from her apron pocket and passes it beneath your nose. The scent strikes you instantly, piercing, caustic, overwhelmingly pungent smelling salts. Ammonium carbonate combined with fragrance, intended to jolt your system back into awareness through pure olfactory aggression. You inhale sharply, pull your head back and feel suddenly, intensely awake. The weightiness withdraws, replaced by a ringing sharpness that's almost more difficult. The smelling salts have completed their task. You are restored. You are operational. You can persist in executing your role for another few hours at minimum. Here's an established fact that clarifies much about Victorian women's wellness. The diagnosis of hysteria was administered so extensively and so repeatedly during this time that it effectively became a catch-all classification for any female affliction that physicians couldn't otherwise identify. Exhaustion, hysteria, nervousness, hysteria, irritation, melancholy, rage, disappointment, or any other sentiment that made men uneasy. Hysteria. The term itself derives from the Greek hystera, meaning womb, reflecting the ancient conviction that women's emotional difficulties originated in their reproductive systems. Victorian physicians inherited this concept and embraced it, establishing an entire medical enterprise around the management of a condition that may never have existed as they comprehended it. Your own physician, Dr. Pemberton, no connection to the Mrs. Pemberton you hosted this afternoon, though wouldn't that be practical? Has consulted you multiple times over the past year for complaints that defy simple classification. You've mentioned headaches that appear and vanish without logic, a continuous fatigue that no degree of rest seems to remedy, a sensation sometimes of being confined in a body that doesn't entirely belong to you, performing movements that have lost their significance. He's listened with the serious consideration that physicians develop, acknowledged thoughtfully, and recommended the typical treatments. Rest. That's always the primary prescription. Rest, rest, and additional rest. The celebrated rest cure created by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell in America has become popular among physicians managing nervous women, and your own physician is an advocate. The treatment is straightforward in principle. Total bed rest, separation from family and acquaintances, a regimen of milk and plain foods, and absolutely no mental engagement of any nature. No reading, no writing, no discussion beyond what's essential for fundamental care. The concept is that the nervous system, overstimulated by the requirements of contemporary life, requires to be essentially powered down and restarted like a mechanism that's overheated. Here's an unusual detail that demonstrates the peculiar reasoning of Victorian medicine. Some physicians believed that thinking itself was hazardous for women. The brain, they contended, competed with the reproductive systems for essential energy. A woman who studied too much or learned too intensively or participated in any type of intellectual work was essentially redirecting resources away from her womb and toward her brain, a redistribution that could result in sterility, hysteria, or both. Education for women was therefore not merely unnecessary, but actively detrimental, a medical hazard to be controlled through deliberate restriction of mental engagement. The reality that this theory conveniently validated keeping women uneducated and reliant was presumably entirely accidental. You haven't experienced the complete rest cure, not yet in any case, but you've been prescribed its milder variation, the afternoon recline. Every day, between tea and dinner, you're supposed to withdraw to your bedroom, release your stays, and recline on the daybed with the drapes closed. No callers, no pursuits, just you and the silence and the slow tick of the timepiece on the mantelpiece. It's supposed to restore your nerves, to conserve your vitality for the demands of evening. In reality, it feels like isolated confinement. With superior furnishings, you stand from the parlour seat and proceed upstairs, your maid following behind with the smelling salts still grasped in her hand, just in case your bedroom has been arranged for the ceremonial rest. The daybed positioned near the window, a light covering draped over its end, the drapes partially closed to establish a dim, womb-like environment. You lower yourself onto the cushions and permit your maid to begin, the partial loosening of your corset not completely removed. That would consume too much time, and you'll require to be dressed again for dinner in an hour. But released enough that you can take a genuine breath for the first time since morning, the relief is instantaneous and nearly overpowering. Your ribs broaden, your lungs fill the dots that have been floating at the periphery of your vision all afternoon withdraw. You didn't recognize how restricted your breathing had become until this instant, when depth is suddenly available. The corset, loosened, still molds you, but it no longer restricts you. You recline against the cushions and gaze at the ceiling, where shadows from the partially closed drapes establish shifting designs in the afternoon dimness. Some researchers contend that many instances of Victorian hysteria were actually the body's rational reaction to regrettably rational circumstances. Women confined in loveless partnerships, refused education and purposeful work, corseted into immobility and anticipated to execute endless social ceremonies without objection. Naturally, they developed manifestations, the exhaustion, the nervousness, the indefinable terror. These weren't indicators of a wandering womb or an overstimulated nervous system. They were indicators of an existence that had become intolerable, articulated in the only vocabulary available to women who weren't authorized to simply state they were miserable. Others proposed that hysteria, whatever its origin, became a type of opposition. A method for women to demand space, consideration and rest in a society that required constant performance. The hysterical woman was pardoned from responsibilities. She was authorized to recline, to be tended to withdraw from the perpetual round of visits and dinners and duties. Her manifestations, genuine or enacted, carved out a space of sanctuary within the confinement of respectability. Illness became a variety of liberation, the only variety accessible. You close your eyes. The room is silent except for the gentle sounds of the house adjusting around you, the groan of floorboards, the remote clatter of vessels from the cooking area, the whisper of staff conducting their work. Your breath ascends and descends, ascends and descends, each rotation a small wonder of biology that you've been overlooking all day. The weightiness is still there, beneath everything, but it feels more controllable now, more endurable. You have an hour before you require to transform again, before the evening's performance commences. An hour of something nearly like tranquility. The daybed is pleasant beneath you, the covering warm against your legs. You contemplate nothing and everything. The visits you made this morning, the charity assembly, the shopping, the continuous parade of faces and dresses and teacups. It all merges together into a variety of agreeable haze, events losing their boundaries, time becoming gentle and flexible. This is what rest resembles, you assume, this suspension between one duty and the next. This interval in the persistent forward movement of an existence you didn't select, but must continue experiencing. The shadows extend on the ceiling. Somewhere in the house, a timepiece sounds, the quarter hour. Your maid will return shortly to commence the process of reconstructing you for dinner. But for now, for these few remaining minutes, you simply inhale. The hour passes like syrup dripping from a utensil, slow, amber, unwilling to conclude, but conclude it must. And shortly your maid reappears to commence the process of constricting your stays once more, restoring the structure of respectability that the rest period briefly dismantled. You sense the familiar compression returning, the ribs pulling inward, the breath growing restricted again. The interval is concluded, the performance continues. But before dinner, before the next wardrobe change, before the intricate ceremony of the evening meal, there's a brief window of time allocated for what the Victorians charmingly term accomplishments. These are the permissible pastimes of a well-bred woman, the arts and abilities that demonstrate cultivation without suggesting anything so crude as talent or, heaven forbid, professional aspiration. You are supposed to be accomplished, but only in the most ornamental sense. Your accomplishments should enhance you like accessories, visible evidence of your upbringing and your leisure, never threatening to become anything as serious as a profession. You proceed to the small sitting room adjoining your bedroom, where your embroidery frame awaits like a patient companion. The fabric stretched across it is a fire screen in development, a needlework picture that will ultimately be mounted in a wooden frame and positioned before the fireplace to protect delicate complexions from the heat. You've been labouring on it for 3 months. At this pace, it might be completed by spring. The design is a pastoral scene, shepherdesses in improbable attire tending improbable sheep beneath improbable trees, all rendered in silk threads that cost more than a housemaid's monthly compensation. You settle into your seat and take up the needle. The thread is a soft blue, intended to suggest sky or perhaps a remote hill. You've neglected which, truthfully, though it scarcely matters. The action of stitching is calming in its repetitiveness. Penetrate the fabric, draw the thread through, penetrate again, draw again. The tiny perforations left by the needle form designs that will ultimately combine into something identifiable. For now they're just points of light against the linen, a constellation being formed, 1 star at a time. Here's an established fact about Victorian women's accomplishments. They were explicitly intended to be impractical. That was the purpose. A woman who could embroider fire screens, create watercolours, perform piano, and converse in passable French was demonstrating that she had the leisure time and financial backing to pursue activities with no practical purpose whatsoever. Accomplishments were class indicators, evidence that you didn't require to do anything productive to exist. The more impractical the ability, the more remarkable its possession. No one truly required another embroidered fire screen. That's precisely what made embroidering ones so valuable. As a social indication, the needle moves in and out, in and out. The silk murmurs against the linen with each pass, a sound so gentle it's almost imperceptible. The room smells of beeswax candles and the faint lavender of the sachet placed into your work basket. Outside the window, the last grey light of afternoon is transforming into the blue-black of early evening. You can hear distantly the sounds of the household arranging for dinner, the clatter of dishes being positioned, the whisper of voices from the servants' domain below. But here, in this small room, time moves at the pace of thread through fabric. Your watercolours rest in the corner untouched for weeks. A partially completed landscape rests on the easel, a view of the lake at your family's country property rendered in the gentle, somewhat muddy colours that characterise amateur work. You're not inadequate at watercolours, actually. You might even be skilled if you were authorised to practice with any earnestness, to study method, to pursue improvement as an objective rather than a pleasant diversion. But that's not how accomplishments function. You're supposed to be skilled enough to exhibit your work on parlour walls, to show callers when they inquire about your pastimes. You're not supposed to be so skilled that questions emerge about how much time you've dedicated to it, or more problematically, whether you might have professional goals. Here's an unusual detail that demonstrates the peculiar boundaries of acceptable female artistry. Women were encouraged to duplicate existing works rather than establish original compositions. Duplicating demonstrated ability and taste without the troubling implications of creativity or self-expression. An original painting might propose that a woman had ideas of her own, thoughts and visions that demanded expression. A duplicate proposed only patience and a steady hand, qualities far more suitable to the feminine ideal. Some art teachers actually discouraged their female students from developing personal styles, worrying it would make them unmarriageable. Artistic genius in a woman was considered nearly as concerning as intellectual genius. You place down the embroidery and move to the pianoforte in the corner. This is another accomplishment, perhaps the most significant one, the capacity to perform music at a level that entertains without intimidating. Every well-bred young lady learns piano. It's part of the standard package, along with drawing and French and the capacity to make agreeable conversation about nothing. You've been performing since you were 6 years old, when your tiny fingers first struggled to span an octave, and your governess struck your knuckles with a ruler when you struck incorrect notes. The piano lid is already elevated, the keys gleaming in the lamplight like a set of flawless teeth. You settle onto the bench, arrange your skirts around you, and position your fingers on the familiar terrain of ivory and ebony. The first notes of a Chopin nocturne emerge, hesitant at first, then flowing more smoothly as muscle memory assumes control. The sound fills the small room. Deep, melancholy, the variety of music that seems to speak of things too profound for language. Your hands move almost without conscious direction, following designs they've traced hundreds of times before. This is the closest you approach to genuine expression. You sometimes think music permits emotions that speech forbids. You can perform a piece that aches with yearning, that trembles with barely suppressed passion, and no one will comment on the impropriety. It's just music, after all. It doesn't signify anything, except it does, naturally. It signifies everything in the only language you're authorized to speak fluently. Some researchers contend that accomplishments, despite their ornamental purpose, gave Victorian women genuine creative outlets in existences otherwise lacking artistic expression. The embroidery, the watercolours, the music. These were spaces where women could exercise ability, make aesthetic decisions, establish beauty in a world that treated them primarily as decorations. Other researchers propose that accomplishments were simply another type of restriction, directing women's creative energies into approved activities that posed no threat to the social structure. The fire screen would hang in the parlour, the watercolour would decorate a bedroom wall, and existence would continue exactly as before. The nocturne reaches its conclusion, the final notes suspended in the air like questions that will never be answered. Your fingers rest on the keys, sensing the cool smoothness of the ivory, the slight roughness where years of performing have worn subtle grooves into the surface. The room is silent except for the gentle tick of the timepiece and the remote sounds of household activity. You could perform another piece. You have time still before the dressing bell sounds, but something restrains you. The music has stated what required stating. More would be repetition. You close the piano lid gently, a gesture that feels almost like tucking something precious into slumber. The embroidery can wait, the watercolours can wait, everything can wait, always waiting, because that's what your existence is, an endless series of waitings interrupted by brief performances. You wait for callers, you wait for meals, you wait for your husband to return from his club, for your children to emerge from the nursery, for the season to commence or conclude, for something, anything, to occur that isn't scheduled on a calling card or penciled into a social diary. The dressing bell sounds, its silver tone cutting through your contemplation. Time to transform again, time to become the evening version of yourself, more elaborate, more ornamental, more thoroughly constructed than the morning or afternoon versions. You stand from the piano bench, smooth your skirts, and prepare to ascend the stairs to your bedroom, where your maid waits with the evening gown and all its attendant complications. Recall that corset from this morning, the one that required 45 minutes to lace properly. You are about to become even more familiar with it. Dinner dress demands tighter lacing, a more dramatic silhouette, a waist that suggests you've never consumed anything more substantial than air and ambition. The transformation awaits, and with it, the longest performance of the day. Your bedroom has been transformed in your absence. The drapes are now completely drawn against the night, the lamps lit to their fullest brightness, and the fire built up to combat the chill that penetrates through the windows despite the heavy curtains. Your evening gown is displayed across the bed like a resting body. Acres of silk in a deep burgundy that will catch the candlelight at dinner, decorated with black lace and tiny jet beads that sparkle like stars. It's beautiful. It's also an engineering project that will demand at minimum an hour to accomplish. Your maid is already waiting, her face composed into the patient neutrality of someone who has executed this 1,000 times before and will execute it 1,000 times more. The afternoon dress must be removed first. All those buttons, those hooks, those layers of fabric that required so long to put on this morning. She labours efficiently, her fingers moving down your spine in a rhythm that's become as familiar as breathing. The dress gathers at your feet, the petticoats follow. You stand in your corset and chemise, sensing the cool air of the room against your exposed arms, goosebumps rising despite the fire's warmth. The corset must be modified for evening. This is not a simple tightening. It's a recalibration, a reshaping of your body to satisfy the requirements of a different silhouette. Evening gowns of this era feature lower necklines, fitted bodices that leave no room for miscalculation, waists that must be impossibly narrow to accomplish the desired effect. Your maid unlaces the back of your corset and commences the process of securing it more tightly, her knee braced against your lower back for leverage. You exhale slowly, deliberately, sensing your ribs compress as the laces draw closer together. Here's an established fact about evening dress that clarifies much of this elaborate preparation. Victorian formal wear was designed to be observed by candlelight, not the harsh glare of electric or gas illumination. The fabrics, the colours, the elaborate trimmings, all were selected to catch and reflect the gentle, flickering glow of candles in chandeliers and wall sconces. This is why evening gowns were frequently made of silk, satin or velvet, materials with a natural sheen that came alive in candlelight. It's also why colours tended toward the deep and jewel-toned burgundy, emerald, sapphire, shades that appeared rich and warm in the golden light of flames. Under modern lighting, these dresses would appear entirely different. Under candlelight, they were enchantment. The lacing continues. You can sense your waist narrowing, your posture straightening, your entire body being reshaped into the fashionable S-curve that the evening silhouette demands. The sensation is not quite pain. You've grown too accustomed to it for that, but it's a constant low-level discomfort that colours everything else. Breathing becomes an act of careful negotiation with the boning that encases your ribs. Bending is nearly impossible. Sitting will demand strategic manoeuvring. You've been dressing like this for years, and it still surprises you how much the body can adapt to restriction. Your maid secures the laces and commences the process of layering the evening undergarments over the newly tightened corset. A fresh chemise, finer than the morning one, with delicate lace at the neckline that will emerge above your bodice. A new petticoat, this one decorated with silk ribbon and cut to accommodate the evening bustle, which is slightly different from the afternoon bustle in ways that matter deeply to dressmakers and very little to anyone else. The bustle itself is secured into position, a construction of wire and padding that establishes the distinctive rear profile of the era. Here's an unusual detail about the mechanics of Victorian evening dress. Many formal gowns were so elaborate, so heavily decorated, so encrusted with beading and embroidery and lace, that they could weigh 15 pounds or more. Women wearing these dresses were essentially carrying the weight of a small dog distributed across their shoulders and hips for the entire evening. Dancing in such a gown demanded genuine athletic capacity, though no one would have described it that way. The physical requirements of femininity were simply taken for granted, invisible labour executed in silk and perspiration. The gown itself is lifted over your head and settles around you like a luxurious cage. The bodice is fitted, scandalously fitted by any standard but evening wear, where low necklines and displayed décolletage are not just acceptable, but required. Your shoulders emerge bare, your collarbones prominent, the tops of your breasts visible above the carefully constructed neckline. It's peculiar, this Victorian paradox. Modesty demanded coverage during the day, but evening dress revealed more skin than any daytime outfit would authorise. The rules existed not to protect women's bodies, but to regulate them, to dictate precisely when and how flesh could be displayed. Your maid fastens the dozens of tiny hooks that close the back of the bodice, each one clicking into position with a small, satisfying sound. The skirt falls in elaborate folds, the silk rustling with every movement, the beading catching the lamplight and throwing tiny sparks of reflection across the walls. You turn to examine yourself in the full-length mirror, and the woman who looks back is someone almost unrecognizable from the creature who woke in this bed 12 hours ago. The transformation is complete, or nearly complete. There's still the hair, the jewellery, the gloves. Your maid commences the process of adjusting your coiffure for evening, adding height, complexity, ornamental pins tipped with jet and pearl. The hair must complement the dress, frame the face, draw attention to the neck and shoulders that the gown so deliberately exposes. Ringlets are arranged to fall artfully against your bare skin. A black velvet ribbon is threaded through the arrangement, echoing the trim on your dress. Nothing is accidental. Every detail has been considered, debated, determined, according to rules you've absorbed so thoroughly you no longer consciously recall learning them. Some researchers contend that the elaborate evening dress of the Victorian era represented the ultimate objectification of women, bodies reshaped, displayed and decorated for the pleasure of observers rather than the comfort of the wearer. Others propose that evening dress was a type of armour, a method for women to command attention and respect in social situations where they otherwise held little authority. The gown announced status, wealth, taste. It demanded to be observed in a world where women's voices were often silenced. Perhaps clothing became a type of speech, loud, insistent, impossible to disregard. The jewellery comes last, a necklace of garnets to complement the burgundy silk, cool against your throat, heavy enough that you sense its presence with every breath, earrings that catch the light when you turn your head, a bracelet over your gloved wrist, because yes, there are evening gloves too, white kid leather that reaches past your elbows, buttons running up the inside of your arms in a line so extended that your maid must fasten each one individually while you stand with your arms extended like a martyr awaiting execution. You observe yourself in the mirror one final time. The woman reflected there is polished, elegant, every inch the lady of the house prepared to preside over her dinner table. She is also exhausted, corseted, hungry, and increasingly certain that the effort required to maintain this illusion far exceeds any possible reward. But these thoughts don't appear on her face. She has been trained never to permit them to appear. The dinner gong sounds from downstairs, its deep bronze note reverberating through the house. This is your signal. The performance is about to commence. You gather your skirts, take one last, shallow breath, and turn toward the door. You descend the staircase slowly, one gloved hand trailing along the banister, your skirts whispering against each step like secrets being shared. The house has shifted into its evening mode, lamps dimmed to flattering levels, candles lit in their silver holders, the smell of beeswax and roasting meat rising from below. Somewhere in the depths of the kitchen, the cook is orchestrating the final preparations for a meal that has been in progress since early afternoon. 8 courses await you, 8 separate acts in the nightly drama of dinner, each with its own requirements, its own silverware, its own unspoken rules. Tonight is not a large gathering, just a small dinner party of 12, intimate by the standards of your social circle. The guests have already assembled in the parlour where sherry is being served, and the low murmur of conversation creates a pleasant hum beneath the crackle of the fire. You pause at the threshold, taking in the scene, the men in their black evening coats and white waistcoats, the women in their elaborate gowns, everyone arranged in careful configurations that appear casual but are anything but. Even standing has rules. Even waiting for dinner demands choreography. Your husband materializes at your side, offering his arm with the practiced grace of a man who has executed this gesture thousands of times. You take it, sensing the solid warmth of him through the layers of wool and linen, and together you survey your domain. These are your guests, your table, your evening to orchestrate. The responsibility settles over you like another layer of clothing, familiar and slightly suffocating. Here's an established fact about Victorian dinner parties that clarifies the elaborate ceremony you're about to undergo. The order of procession into the dining room was determined by strict rules of precedence based on rank, title, and social standing. The highest-ranking gentleman present would escort the hostess, that's you, into dinner, while your husband would escort the highest-ranking lady. Everyone else fell into position according to a complex calculus of status that guests were anticipated to understand without being told. Getting the order incorrect was a serious social error, one that could cause offence and be discussed disapprovingly for weeks afterward. The butler materialises at the parlour door and announces in tones of quiet gravity that dinner is served. A subtle shift ripples through the room as guests begin to arrange themselves for the procession. Lord Ashbury, the evening's ranking gentleman, an elderly baron with impressive whiskers and a tendency to discuss his hunting dogs at length, approaches you and offers his arm. You accept with a gracious smile that reveals nothing of your feelings about spending the next 2 hours seated beside a man whose primary conversational interests are canine genealogy and the declining quality of modern gamekeepers. The procession commences. You lead the way, your hand resting lightly on Lord Ashbury's sleeve, your skirts sweeping across the polished floors in a gentle percussion of silk against wood. The dining room doors stand open, revealing the table in all its glory. White damask linens, crystal glasses catching the candlelight, silver gleaming at each place setting, flowers arranged in low centerpieces that won't obstruct conversation. From your position at the table's end, the chamber's fragrance fills your senses with layers of meaning. Melted wax from tapers, pressed fabric stiffened with starch, the cool, verdant notes of cut flowers displayed throughout and underlying everything, the mouth-watering hints of the feast approaching. Your seat awaits at the table's foot. At the opposite end sits your spouse, while invited company finds their positions guided by the name cards placed thoughtfully at every setting. This seating strategy has consumed considerable energy, weighing social standing against the likelihood of agreeable discourse, making certain nobody ends up beside someone they've lately argued with, or perhaps worse, beside someone whose company they find unbearably dull. The hours you've devoted to this arrangement exceed what you'd willingly admit, moving cards about like someone reading fortunes, laying out destiny, attempting to foresee which pairings will spark pleasant exchange and which will spawn uncomfortable quiet. The opening dish appears, a transparent broth, golden and shimmering, presented in wide vessels with delicate handles shaped like tiny ears. The aroma rises on steam, robust and meaty, carrying notes of garden herbs and the faintest trace of fortified wine. You grasp your soup utensil, the bowl-shaped one, remembering to scoop outward from your body and lift the initial sip toward your mouth. The broth runs warm and intensely savoury, a concentration born from lengthy simmering of marrow and produce, filtered and refined until it sparkles like precious amber. You consume measured spoonfuls, controlling your rhythm, aware that 7 additional dishes follow, and that displaying genuine hunger would constitute serious misjudgment. Consider this interesting detail regarding the intricate place arrangements at Victorian dining tables. A proper dinner could demand up to 12 individual utensils positioned at each guest's place, organised in precise sequence indicating which implement should accompany which dish. The common principle suggested working inward from the periphery the farthest fork for the opening course, followed by the subsequent fork for the second dish, continuing this pattern. Yet exceptions and complications abounded. Particular spoons designated for certain broths, dedicated forks reserved for seafood, diminutive tools whose function remained obscure to anyone lacking thorough education in the protocols of ceremonial dining. Guests experiencing uncertainty would observe their hostess and mirror her choices, meaning you could never waver, never reveal doubt about which fork suited the moment, your assurance directing everyone else's actions. Dialogue moves throughout the table in the distinctive cadence of ceremonial dining. You address the gentleman positioned to your right throughout one dish, then pivot toward the gentleman to your left during the subsequent course. This rotation is mandatory, guaranteeing nobody feels neglected and nobody becomes dominated. The subjects are monitored carefully: the atmospheric conditions, current theatrical offerings, the quality of rural roadways. Political discourse is prohibited, spiritual matters are prohibited, financial topics never surface. Impropriety receives acknowledgement only through implication, through elevated eyebrows and pregnant silences that transmit understanding without explicit statement. Lord Ashbury shares details about his championship hunting dog, an animal called Champion, whose lineage supposedly extends back to some canine nobility preceding the Norman invasion. You respond with nods, voice suitable reactions, and attempt to appear captivated while privately tallying how many additional dishes must be survived before the women retreat, and you can escape toward the sitting room. The seafood dish arrives sole once more, you observe, though executed differently from the midday meal, and you rotate with gratitude toward the gentleman on your opposite side, a younger fellow with compassionate eyes and an inclination to genuinely attend when you communicate. Certain academics contend that the inflexible formality of Victorian dining occasions fulfilled an essential social purpose, establishing organised settings where individuals from various circumstances could engage following clear, mutual guidelines. The etiquette functioned as a type of universal language, a shared vocabulary enabling everyone to contribute without the tension of spontaneity. Alternative voices proposed that the formality itself created exclusion, engineered to recognise and humiliate those lacking appropriate upbringing. An incorrectly employed fork could brand someone as an interloper more decisively than any dialect or residence. The dishes advance in their measured sequence. The seafood transitions to an intermediate course of organ meat in dairy reduction, which surrenders to a frozen dessert intended to refresh the taste before the main protein. The roast presents itself as an enormous cut of cattle carved at the serving station by a manservant with clinical exactness. Each portion positioned upon the china with the attention of an artist composing a masterpiece. Accompanying vegetables materialise potatoes, tender green spears, something verdant that could be legumes, and you accept modest servings of everything, redistributing food across your dish in arrangements suggesting consumption without demanding substantial actual eating. The tapers waver in their stands, projecting mobile shadows across your guests' countenances. The discussion has expanded somewhat in volume, somewhat more spirited, as fermented grape loosens inhibitions and the gathering advances. Someone produces genuine laughter at the table's distant section, an authentic sound, not the controlled titter that typically substitutes for entertainment at these assemblies, and you experience a minor surge of contentment. The dinner progresses favourably. Your company is deriving pleasure. The exhibition, regardless of its expense, is achieving success. The confection course materialises, an ornate construction of crystallised sugar and dairy that appears too exquisite for consumption and carries flavours of vanilla essence and floral petals. You accept a solitary mouthful, permitting the sweetness to melt against your palate, and lower your utensil with the decisiveness of completion. The meal approaches its end. Shortly you'll stand, secure the attention of the most distinguished lady in attendance, and escort the women from the dining chamber, while the gentlemen stay behind with their fortified wine and their tobacco, and their discussions about matters that evidently cannot be addressed in feminine presence. The taper closest to your position flickers somewhat, releasing a slender stream of vapour toward the overhead surface. The scent combines with the persistent fragrances of cuisine and fermented grape and blossoms, producing something intricate and unmistakably Victorian, the perfume of prosperity, of exertion, of an entire domestic establishment activated to generate the singular evening of consumption and exhibition. You inhale it with the restricted breaths your undergarment permits, and await the cue to stand. You emerge from your seat, and every woman at the gathering rises simultaneously, a coordinated action appearing effortless but rehearsed through innumerable dinners, innumerable evenings, innumerable enactments of this specific ceremony. The gentlemen rise equally, a demonstration of deference that will endure precisely as long as required for the final silk garment to pass the threshold. Subsequently, they'll return to their positions, release their waistcoat fastenings, and extend toward the fortified wine already being poured at the serving station. Their evening is approaching considerably enhanced comfort. Yours is approaching a transformed type of exhibition. The women advance from the dining chamber in a whisper of fabric and hushed dialogue, abandoning the scent of roasted cattle and taper vapour for the more delicate atmosphere of the sitting room. The hearth has been strengthened during your absence, the illumination adjusted to complementary intensities, the tea service already positioned on the low surface near the upholstered bench. This becomes your territory now, the feminine realm, where you'll remain 20 minutes, 30, occasionally an hour, until the gentlemen complete their fortified wine and their tobacco and their dialogues about politics and commerce, and all the matters too significant or too crude for feminine hearing. Consider this conventional understanding about this peculiar Victorian custom. The division of genders following dinner was deemed crucial to appropriate hospitality. The stated reasoning suggested that women's refined sensitivities required shielding from the vulgar discussion and tobacco fumes that unavoidably followed male post-dinner unwinding. The unstated reasoning was gentlemen desired to converse without restriction, without tempering their vocabulary or their subjects. For feminine company, the fortified wine and tobacco were nearly incidental to the liberty from feminine scrutiny. You position yourself in your customary chair and receive a teacup from the housemaid who appears with the vessel. The remaining women organize themselves throughout the chamber, their garments expanding like rare blooms across the furnishings. Discussion commences, more relaxed now than at dinner, unrestricted by the requirement to alternate between dining companions or sustain the pretense of shared enthusiasm. Minor clusters develop and transform, allegiances apparent in the positioning of frames, the tilting of heads, the nuanced placement indicating who commands favour and who does not. Mrs. Ashworth commands attention near the hearth, recounting a garment she witnessed at Worth's Paris establishment, the celebrated designer whose innovations establish fashion for the complete Western civilization. The other women attend with faces of courteous envy, privately assessing whether their personal wardrobes compare adequately. Lady Pemberton sits somewhat isolated, her expression arranged in pleasant detachment, suggesting she contemplates something altogether different. The younger women gather near the musical instrument, and ultimately one receives persuasion to perform a Chopin study, executed competently if lacking inspiration. Consider this interesting detail about sitting room amusement. The expectation to perform remained persistent but precisely measured. Every young woman was anticipated to demonstrate piano ability, vocal talent, or poetry recitation when requested, yet she was simultaneously anticipated to demand encouragement before consenting to exhibit her abilities. Enthusiastic performance implied conceit. Extreme reluctance implied artificial modesty. The optimal response was elegant surrender following exactly appropriate amounts of tender persistence, a transaction so formalized that everyone understood their roles before the initial note sounded. The melody occupies the chamber, offering concealment for discussions that might otherwise reach unintended ears. You discover yourself adjacent to Lady Hartington, an elder woman whose penetrating observation misses nothing and whose recollection for social transgressions extends back generations. She's remarking on the Ashworth woman's attire, exquisite material but inadequately tailored. She notes the effort of an inferior seamstress attempting to replicate Worth's aesthetic without grasping his methods. You respond with agreement, add an observation of your personal making, and experience the recognizable weariness of sustaining perpetual alertness regarding your statements. Certain historians suggest that the sitting room, despite its limitations, provided women a location of authentic connection, present, removed from masculine scrutiny. Women could communicate more candidly, exchange intelligence and guidance, establish connections that would support them through the separation of their domestic existences. The discussion might appear insignificant to external observers: fashion, household staff, domestic administration, yet these subjects held profound importance to women whose complete reality centered upon such concerns. Alternative perspectives propose that even in the sitting room, women remained performers, vying with each other for position and validation, never genuinely comfortable. The piano composition concludes to courteous recognition. Someone proposes cards, and a surface is prepared for whist. You refuse to participate. Your position as hostess demands movement, awareness of all company rather than immersion in a singular pursuit. Rather, you circulate throughout the chamber, confirming that teacups remain filled, that nobody sits solitary, that the evening progresses seamlessly toward its predictable conclusion. Time behaves peculiarly in the sitting room. The timepiece on the shelf advances consistently. Yet, the minutes appear to elongate and contract following their personal logic. You've been anticipating perhaps 45 minutes when the sitting room entrance eventually opens and the gentlemen return to the gathering, carrying with them the residual scent of tobacco and the somewhat flushed appearance of gentlemen who've been consuming steadily since the broth course. Your spouse captures your attention across the chamber, a momentary recognition, nothing beyond, and the evening transitions to its concluding stage. The reunited assembly mingles more openly now, gentlemen and women moving in configurations that would have been unthinkable at the ceremonial dining table. Someone proposes additional melody, and one of the younger gentlemen receives persuasion to perform a sentimental composition about vanished affection that produces tears in several feminine eyes and understanding expressions in several masculine ones. The hearth diminishes, the tapers waver in their stands. The evening concludes, though nobody will depart until the highest-ranking company signals their withdrawal. Eventually, mercifully, Lord and Lady Ashbury advance toward the entrance. This becomes the indication everyone has anticipated. Within 15 minutes the sitting room is cleared, the front entrance has secured behind the final coach, and the residence settles into the specific quiet following a gathering. The silence of reprieve, of responsibilities fulfilled, of exhibitions completed. You remain solitary in the entry chamber momentarily, attending to the sounds of household staff commencing to organise the sitting room, the remote clatter of vessels being cleaned in the lower kitchen. Your feet throb within your evening footwear. Your head pulses faintly from hours of measured dialogue. Your undergarment has relocated throughout the evening, and a support edge presses agonisingly against your lower rib with every inhalation. The evening concludes. You've executed your role impeccably, welcoming hostess, delightful conversationalist, refined adornment to your spouse's gathering. Nobody perceived the weariness underlying the exhibition. Nobody imagined the vacant sensation that's been expanding in your chest throughout the evening. The facade maintained as it invariably does, as it invariably must. Your attendant awaits upstairs to commence the extended procedure of deconstructing you for the night. You collect your garments one concluding time and initiate the gradual ascent toward bed, toward rest, toward the limited hours of darkness. You belong exclusively to yourself. The setting transforms now, departing from the personal dining occasion and towards something more substantial, more magnificent, more frightening in its magnitude. Imagine yourself not in your personal dining chamber, but in a ballroom, among the magnificent ballrooms of Mayfair, where illumination fixtures cascade with crystal and tapers count in the hundreds, where the surface has been buffed to such brilliance that you can observe your reflection in it, warped and ethereal beneath your dancing steps. This represents the London season, that yearly movement of the privileged classes from their rural properties to the capital, and you are captured in its sparkling, draining flow. The season extends roughly from April through July, though the precise parameters shift according to Parliament's timetable and the fluctuations of fashion. Throughout these months, London converts into a platform for the most complex social theatre conceivable. Balls, dinners, opera showings, garden celebrations, morning visits multiplied exponentially. The calendar transforms into a merciless progression of commitments that permits no opportunity for rest, for contemplation, for anything approximating a personal existence. You might visit 3 occasions in a solitary evening, replacing garments between each one, traversing London in a coach that has transformed into a mobile changing chamber. Consider this conventional understanding about the intention underlying all this radiance. The season functioned primarily as a matrimonial marketplace. Young women of marriageable years were transported to London by their relatives and exhibited at ball following ball, occasion following occasion, hoping to secure appropriate spouses. The term exhibited carries appropriate weight. Debutantes were introduced at court to the Queen personally, bowing in complex white garments before being distributed into society like merchandise at an auction. Their worth was evaluated openly, their attractiveness, their behaviour, their family associations, their financial settlements. A prosperous season indicated an engagement. An unsuccessful one indicated returning to the countryside in subdued disgrace to attempt again subsequent year or acknowledge reduced possibilities. The ballroom swirls surrounding you now, a kaleidoscope of pigment and motion. The musicians perform from a platform above, the melody descending through air, dense with fragrance and taper vapour, and the warmth of 500 frames in ceremonial attire. The scent overwhelms, blossoms concentrated in every alcove, the waxy sweetness of burning tapers, the sharper notes of moisture barely concealed by scented water. Women's garments contact each other as they advance, fabric murmuring against fabric, the whisper of material establishing a persistent accompaniment to the melody. You observe the young women circling the chamber on their companions' arms, their expressions fixed in appearances of pleasant animation revealing nothing of the assessments occurring behind their eyes. That gentleman represents a secondary heir. No title, restricted revenue, not worth consideration unless his elder sibling is infirm. That one carries gambling obligations rumoured to surpass his yearly revenue. That one in the azure jacket near the refreshment table is successor to an earldom and consequently surrounded by mothers and daughters like predators circling vulnerable quarry. Every waltz represents a transaction. Every discussion represents an evaluation. Every expression represents a tactical deployment of restricted resources. Consider this interesting detail about the mechanics of ballroom endurance. A young woman's dancing record was a tangible item, a diminutive booklet or card, with positions for gentlemen to inscribe their identities. Beyond specific dances, being observed with an unoccupied dancing record was social catastrophe, proof that nobody desired you. Yet having your record completed too rapidly suggested excessive eagerness, a desperation equally destructive. The optimal outcome was a record that completed at a consistent rhythm throughout the evening, establishing popularity without impropriety. Certain mothers organised for reliable family acquaintances to reserve early dances, guaranteeing their daughters wouldn't be observed standing solitary while the melody performed. The waltz carried specific significance with particular weight. Unlike the more ceremonial country dances where companions barely contacted, the waltz demanded genuine physical proximity. A gentleman's palm at your midsection, your frames moving in close synchronization, countenances inches separated for the dance's duration. When the waltz initially became fashionable in England, it was regarded scandalous, virtually improper. By your period, it's acknowledged, yet still carries significance. A gentleman who solicits multiple waltzes with the identical young woman is communicating a declaration. He is announcing attraction. He is fundamentally establishing a claim. You recall your personal season years previous. Now, though the recollections have mellowed with time into something nearly pleasant, the fear of your court introduction, bowing before the Queen in a garment so weighted with decoration, you could scarcely walk. The continuous balls where you smiled until your expression ached, danced until your feet developed blisters within your fabric slippers, maintained discussion with young gentlemen whose identities you forgot the instant they restored you to your mother's presence. The relief overwhelming, nearly shameful, when your engagement was eventually declared and you could retreat from the competition, your future guaranteed, your worth validated. Certain historians contend that the season, despite its matrimonial marketplace severity, provided young women among their limited opportunities for independence. Within its rigid guidelines, there existed opportunity for tactics, for selection, for the application of intelligence pursuing personal objectives. A resourceful young woman could position herself toward a desirable arrangement, circumvent an undesirable one, influence her personal destiny within the limitations available. Alternative suggestions proposed this independence was deceptive, a fiction that rendered acceptable what was fundamentally the transaction of women to the superior bidder. The selections were all executed within a structure engineered to advantage gentlemen, and any authority women wielded was borrowed, provisional, easily withdrawn. The melody intensifies and diminishes, intensifies and diminishes. You observe a young debutante being escorted onto the surface by a viscount double her years, her expression radiant and fragile, her mother observing from the periphery with scarcely contained tension. The girl appears attractive, well endowed from a respectable family. She'll succeed, presumably. She'll obtain her arrangement, establish her marriage, commence the extended procedure of converting from daughter to wife to mother to dowager. The cycle persists, generation following generation, each young woman assuming her season is distinctive while traversing the identical path innumerable others have traversed previously. The tapers are diminishing now, their illumination growing gentler, more forgiving. The ballroom has reduced somewhat as elder company commence to depart, yet the young individuals remain determined to extract every feasible moment from the evening. Somewhere a girl is experiencing affection or assumes she is. Somewhere a mother is obtaining an introduction that will transform her daughter's existence. Somewhere a young gentleman is accumulating the courage to solicit a secondary waltz, understanding what it will communicate, hoping she'll consent. You rotate away from the dancers and discover a quiet alcove where you can rest momentarily, your back against a column, still cool despite the chamber's warmth. Your dancing years are concluded. Married women don't participate in this specific arena, yet you recall what it experienced. The anticipation and the apprehension, the weariness and the excitement, the perception that everything relied upon these limited months, these limited dances, these limited carefully selected words. It was dreadful. It was exhilarating. It was the nearest thing to liberation you'd ever experienced, even as it was engineered to terminate your liberation permanently. The musicians commence another waltz, the composition drifting through the overheated air like a recollection of something beautiful and vanished. The coach transports you homeward through streets quieter now, the hour grown sufficiently late that even London has commenced to surrender to sleep. The gas illumination flickers past the window in a mesmerising cadence. Yellow circles of light divided by segments of shadow, the city reduced to impressions rather than particulars. Your head rests against the leather cushion, your eyes partially closed, the weariness of the day eventually permitted to display now that nobody is observing. The undergarment still grips your ribs, yet you've ceased noticing it the way you cease noticing a headache that's persisted too extensively. It's simply component of you now, this persistent low-intensity discomfort, as recognisable as respiration. The residence is quiet when you arrive, the household staff having withdrawn to their attic chambers, excluding the footman who awaits to open the entrance and your lady's attendant who awaits upstairs to commence the concluding ceremony of your day. The entry chamber smells of extinguished tapers and the remaining phantom of dinner, roasted cattle and blossoms, fermented grape and timber vapour. The standing clock advances consistently in the darkness, measuring time that suddenly appears valuable. These limited remaining hours before morning delivers a fresh round of responsibilities. You ascend the stairs gradually, one palm on the railing, your garments collected in the other. The fabric murmurs against each step, a sound that's accompanied you throughout the day, that will accompany you again tomorrow. The gas illumination on the landing has been reduced low, projecting extensive shadows that render the recognisable corridor appear unusual, nearly unfamiliar. Your bedroom entrance stands open, warm illumination spilling outward, your attendant's silhouette apparent against the radiance. Consider this conventional understanding about the nightly undressing it required nearly as extensive as the morning dressing, occasionally longer. Every fastening that had been secured must now be released. Every pin that had been positioned must now be extracted. The complex architecture of hair and fabric and boning must be deconstructed piece by piece, the constructed woman disassembled to expose the human being underneath. Certain ladies discovered this procedure calming, a progressive liberation from the day's limitations. Others discovered it merely monotonous, one additional task to survive before sleep could eventually claim them. Your attendant commences with the jewellery, the garnets removed from your throat, the earrings detached, the bracelet unfastened from your wrist. Each piece is restored to its velvet-lined container, with attention, treasures being secured for preservation. Subsequently, the gloves, those endless fastenings running down the interior of your arms, each one demanding individual attention. The kid leather separates away from your skin, leaving faint impressions where the seams pressed too firmly. Your hands surface, pale and somewhat moist, eventually free to move without limitation. The evening garment follows. Your attendant works down the sequence of fasteners at your back, her fingers moving with the automatic proficiency of extensive practice. You experience the bodice releasing, the grip around your ribs, relaxing somewhat, though the undergarment beneath still maintains you in its embrace. The garment pools at your steps, a burgundy accumulation of fabric and decoration that exceeded what your attendant will acquire in 2 years. She collects it attentively, positions it over a seat to be brushed and examined before being stored. Tomorrow it will suspend in your wardrobe, anticipating its subsequent exhibition. The petticoats follow, subsequently the framework, subsequently the layers of undergarments that divide your frame from the world. Each extraction delivers a modest reprieve, a slight expansion of possibility. You can incline a little more, respire a little deeper, move with something approaching naturalness. The chamber smells of your personal fragrance, liberated by the warmth of your frame throughout the extended evening, combined with the more personal sense of exertion and weariness. Consider this interesting detail about Victorian hair maintenance. The complex styles that required an hour to establish were not genuinely dismantled every night. Hair cleansing was a weekly occurrence at most, and the intricate arrangements of braids and waves were frequently simply secured into a protective covering for sleeping, to be refreshed rather than reconstructed the subsequent morning. The quantity of pomade and oil necessary to sustain these styles indicated that pillowcases required frequent replacement. And the scent of a bedroom in the morning could be quite distinctive. Fragrance and hair product, and the specific staleness of sleep. Your attendant releases your hair now, extracting the jet decorations, the velvet ribbon, the innumerable pins that have maintained the structure in position. Each pin produces a modest sound as it's deposited into the porcelain vessel on your dressing surface, a gentle percussion marking the advancement of your deconstruction. Your hair descends, gradually liberated from its limitations, cascading down your back in waves that still retain the memory of their arrangement. The mass of it against your shoulders experiences unusual after hours of meticulous styling. Nearly too substantial. The undergarment is final. Your attendant unlaces it gradually, providing your frame time to accommodate to each increment of liberation. The The sensation is remarkable, your ribs expanding, your lungs filling appropriately for the initial time since morning, your complete torso appearing to exhale with relief. The boning has left crimson impressions against your skin, lines and indentations that will diminish by morning, yet function now as proof of the day's limitations. You press a palm against your abdomen, experiencing the softness that the undergarment concealed, the human frame that fashion demands you hide. A nightgown is positioned over your head, gentle cotton, white, elevated necked and extended sleeved. The material settles against your skin like a murmur, so light following the substantial fabrics of the day that you nearly experience nakedness. Your attendant brushes your hair, extended, gradual strokes that release the tension from your scalp, and the sensation is so calming you experience your eyes commencing to close. The brush murmurs through your hair. Murmurs, murmurs. A sound like foliage rustling in a distant garden. Certain historians have observed that the relationship between a Victorian woman and her personal attendant was among the most personal in her existence. This woman perceived you at your most vulnerable, undressed, unprotected, stripped of the armour you wore in public. She understood the secrets your clothing concealed, the imperfections. Your undergarment corrected the weariness that your expression concealed. Yet she was additionally a servant, a member of a different class, someone you likely understood very little about as an individual. The intimacy was completely unidirectional. She understood everything about your frame. You presumably didn't understand if she had siblings. Your attendant assists you into bed, modifying the cushions, drawing upward the covers. The sheets are cool against your skin, clean linen that smells faintly of lavender and starch. The hearth has diminished to embers, projecting a dim orange radiance across the overhead surface. The chamber is quiet, excluding the gentle sounds of your attendant organising away the remnants of the day, securing jewellery containers, suspending garments, extinguishing tapers one by one until only a solitary flame remains on the nightstand. She bows a modest gesture, nearly invisible in the dimness, and withdraws, securing the entrance gently behind her. You are solitary at last. The silence settles surrounding you like a secondary blanket, and you realise this is the initial true solitude you've experienced since opening your eyes this morning. 14 hours of persistent company, persistent exhibition, persistent awareness of being observed. And now, eventually, the dark and the quiet and the gentle mass of the blankets. And nobody observing, nobody evaluating, nobody demanding anything of you whatsoever. You gaze at the overhead surface, where shadows shift and move in the ember illumination. Your frame experiences unusual without the undergarment, expansive, uncontained, nearly shapeless. Your consciousness drifts through the day's occurrences, already commencing to merge together into a general impression of exertion and weariness. The visits, the charity, the shopping, the tea, the dinner, the continuous exhibition of being precisely what everyone anticipated you to be. Sleep approaches gradually, gently, like a tide advancing. The darkness maintains you now, gentle and complete. The solitary taper on your nightstand has diminished to a stub, its flame modest and wavering, projecting just sufficient illumination to render the shadows appear alive. The residence has grown quiet surrounding you, that specific hush of a sleeping household where even the servants have withdrawn to their attic beds, and the only sounds are the settling of aged timber, the murmur of wind against window glass, the remote chime of a timepiece marking hours that no longer demand your attention. This is yours, these dark hours, this stillness, this limited space between the conclusion of one exhibition and the commencement of another. For limited hours, you belong to nobody. No visitors will materialize at your entrance, no servants will knock seeking instructions. No spouse will demand your presence, your attention, your meticulously arranged expression. The darkness asks nothing of you excluding that you rest within it, and for once you can comply without negotiation. Your frame experiences unusual in its liberation without the undergarment. Your ribs expand with each respiration, occupying spaces that have been compressed since dawn. The nightgown rests gentle against your skin, so light you can scarcely experience it. The mattress cradles you, the cushions support you, and the mass of the blankets is comforting rather than limiting these simple physical sensations. Comfort, warmth, the absence of pressure, experience nearly luxurious following a day spent in the complex armour of respectability. Consider something the historical records rarely capture: the isolation of privilege. Throughout the day you have been surrounded by individuals, attendants and footmen, visitors and dinner company, servants and merchants, and the continuous parade of countenances that populate a prosperous woman's world. And yet genuine connection has been nearly completely absent. Every interaction followed a script, every discussion moved along predetermined tracks. Even your spouse, lying somewhere in his personal bedroom down the corridor, understands the wife he married rather than the woman who wears that title like a costume she can never quite extract. The hearth in the fireplace has diminished to embers, orange and crimson, pulsing gently in the darkness like a gradual heartbeat. The warmth it provides is diminishing, yet sufficient remains to maintain the chill at distance. You observe the pigments shift and transform, configurations forming and dissolving in the ash, and your thoughts commence to drift in the manner they only can when nobody is observing. What would your existence have been, you contemplate, if you had been born in a transformed time, a transformed class, a transformed frame completely? The question carries no answer, and perhaps that's why it experiences safe to pose it here in the dark, where nobody can hear. Certain historians examining this era will compose about oppression, about the limitations that bound women like invisible restraints. Alternative historians will compose about the authentic pleasures of domestic existence, the contentment of a household properly managed, a family properly raised, a social standing properly sustained. Both perspectives contain truth. Both omit something fundamental. Because what the historians cannot capture is this moment, this solitude, this quiet dialogue with yourself in the hours when the exhibition has paused and you can simply exist without intention or pretense. The question is not whether you are content. Contentment is a concept too simple for the complexity of your existence. The question is whether you are yourself. And the answer is uncertain. You have devoted so many years becoming what others demanded: daughter, wife, mother, hostess, woman of standing, that the original individual, the one who existed before all these roles accumulated around her, has become difficult to locate. She's in there somewhere, you assume. She surfaces in peculiar moments. A passage of melody that moves you more than it should. A beam of sunlight through a window. The scent of precipitation on pavement. Modest reminders that beneath all the fabric and whalebone a human heart still beats. The taper wavers and stabilizes, wavers and stabilizes. The flame is extremely modest now, scarcely more than a spark clinging to the final portion of the wick. When it extinguishes, the chamber will be completely dark, excluding the diminishing embers. You should experience frightened, perhaps, of that darkness, yet you don't. The darkness experiences like privacy, like protection, like the only space where you are permitted to be incomplete, uncertain, imperfect. Your eyes grow weighted. The thoughts that have been circling commence to decelerate, to settle, to blur at the peripheries. Tomorrow will deliver another morning, another undergarment, another day of visits and correspondence and measured exhibition. Yet, that is tomorrow. Tonight there is only this: the warmth of the blankets, the gentleness of the cushion, the quiet cadence of your personal respiration. In the dark, the taper flame wavers one final time and extinguishes. The darkness is complete now, velvet, gentle and absolute. And somewhere in that darkness, you experience something release. Not the undergarment, which is already extracted, yet something deeper. Something that has been maintained firm throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, for as extensive as you can recall. In the darkness, nobody can perceive you. In the darkness, you don't have to be anything whatsoever. The hearth is dimming now, its radiance scarcely apparent. Just a faint warmth extending toward where you rest. The chamber has grown, still surrounding you, and the silence experiences like a blanket drawn gently over the world. Permit your respiration to decelerate, permit your shoulders to sink deeper into the cushion. The day is complete, fully and completely complete, and you have transported it as far as it required to progress. Contemplate all the women who preceded you, the Victorian women in their magnificent residences, their undergarments and visiting cards, their continuous exhibitions of grace. They slumbered in chambers like this one, observed hearths diminished to embers, experienced the identical relief when the darkness eventually arrived. They transported their days too substantial and complex, and they positioned them down each night, just as you are positioning yours down now. There is a type of communion in that, a thread connecting you across the centuries. To all those who have sought rest following extensive hours of being observed, the warmth is still present, gentle and gentle, the quiet hums surrounding you like a lullaby without words. Your frame experience is calm, your consciousness experience is calm, everything experience is calm and safe and still. The exhibition is concluded, the audience has departed homeward, the platform is dark, and you can eventually cease being observed. Permit the images of the day to diminish now. The fabric garments and silver tea vessels, the visiting cards and candle-lit dinners, permit them to blur and soften until they're just impressions, just pigments, just the faint echo of a world that will await until morning to demand your attention again. Right now there is nothing to execute, nothing to be, only rest, only warmth, only the peaceful drift towards sleep. The darkness maintains you gently, the manner it has maintained innumerable sleepers previously. The hearth is nearly extinguished now, just the faintest radiance remaining, sufficient to remind you that warmth exists, even in darkness. Your eyes are closed or closing, and the boundary between waking and dreaming has grown gentle and permeable. You are safe here. You are quiet. Here you are for these limited valuable hours, completely your personal. Sleep arrives now, gentle and deep, transporting you away from undergarments and visiting cards, from exhibitions and responsibilities, from everything that daylight demands. The extended day has concluded. The silence welcomes you. And somewhere in the darkness, the woman you might have been smiles gently and accepts your hand, guiding you down into dreams where nobody is observing, where nothing is demanded, where you can simply rest. Pleasant dreams.